We're going to call this meeting to order. It is 1 p.m. and it is Tuesday, September 24th, and this is the Superintendent's Workshop. We do have a heavy agenda here today and presentations and items to get through. The first item that we're going to start off with is our leadership profile report from HYA, but at this time I'm going to turn the meeting over to Dr. Moxley.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Zork and members of the board. Thank you very much for being here this afternoon. We do have a fully packed agenda. There is one item I'm going to pull from the agenda this afternoon and tonight, and that has to do with the African American Achievement Plan. But when we get to that point, I'd like to just give you background on why I'm doing that. So we won't spend a lot of time on it this afternoon, but I will give you some rationale for that request. But I think we want to go ahead and move forward with our first item, and we want to welcome Dr. Adams back to Vero Beach, and thank you for being here this afternoon. And I know that there's lots of items to go through.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be back, and hopefully you all received your material and have gone through it, and there'll be questions, comments, and we'll try to clarify anything that needs clarification. What we'd like to try to accomplish is an overview of the community survey. It's about 7-8 pages that you have, that you received, and then go through the leadership profile. Not line by line, that's 26 pages, but at least give you the highlights, and then if you have questions from your reading of the materials, we'll try to address those. And then present the desired characteristic recommendations, and then ultimately would ask that at some point, whether it's now or at your meeting tonight, that you approve the desired characteristics after discussion or any modifications that you make. So with that, I'd ask you to either take your hard copy of the survey, or if you'll pull it up on the computer, and I'm going to do the same with...
Excuse me, the survey or the results?
The survey results. I know in some places, I want to mention when we get to the profile, it will say Board of Education. And I know from a technical standpoint, the Board of Education in Florida is the state board. You are the school board for the Indian River County Schools. And if anything needs that, that's a piece of our software. If anything needs to be corrected or to be clearer, we can certainly address that.
Clarify. When you say the results of the survey, are you talking about the report titled Leadership Profile?
No, HYA survey. Superintendent Search Survey.
What's this? What was in our? It looks like what's in your binder. Yeah, it says. All right, got it.
Candidate suggestions.
That's
No.
Okay.
No? Profile report
I've got candidate suggestions, but that's just names.
or characteristics, final
You
desired?
should have Superintendent Search Survey for School District of Indian River County on the cover.
We have leadership profile, final desired characteristics, final leadership profile, and candidate suggestions.
Did that get emailed to us?
It should have been emailed.
Okay. Okay. Is it in?
Should we take a recess while we just clarify? We're going to call the meeting back to order. We are still trying to get copies so that we can continue the presentation with Hazard Young. But before we, while we're waiting on that, Mrs. DiAgresta had a date that we need to finalize with her, and we can go ahead and utilize our time right now while we're waiting on the copies. And I'm going to turn this over to Mrs. DiAgresta so she can explain what we need.
Thank you, Mrs. Zork. Board members, you'll recall some communications that I sent you last week with regard to the impasse hearing that is now required to be set for the school board. And I asked you to remember to bring your calendars today so that we could go ahead and find a date when the board members are available to have this impasse hearing. From a timing perspective, we still need to give notice of the public hearing, so we certainly can't do it today. and the two parties need a little bit of time to know about the date and to be prepared to give their presentation to the board. In prior impasse hearings, just to give you some parameters, in the past, typically, we have asked the board members to set aside around 4 hours so that we can be sure to get all of the information presented to you, that you have sufficient time to do your deliberations and make any decision that you may like to have. The superintendent has already provided you with her recommendations for resolving the impasse issues, and IRCEA's deadline for providing their recommendation is October the 2nd. So if you would look on your calendars, and I know Dr. Moxley also has some information about when both IRCEA and district staff and representatives are available, so that it's kind of a moving target to get one date where we can get everybody in the room. But if you would look at your calendars, are we looking at a particular week?
Well, as far as IRCEA, I know that they were really interested in next week. However, in Mrs. Oak speaking to Wayne Helsby, he does have one day next week that would coordinate with my calendar, and that is Thursday. However, he really has requested us look at multiple dates, meaning October 14th, 15th, and 16th. One of those days would be his first choice. However, Thursday of next week would be the second choice.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the October dates?
October 14th, 15th, and 16th.
I think October, for me, I think October 15th, which is a Tuesday, would be my first choice. This Thursday, though, I'm just not available on this Thursday.
Okay.
I'm not available on the 15th.
Okay. Okay.
My apologies, my calendars are on my desk. I thought we were discussing this tonight.
That's fine.
Can I go get them?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I'm okay with it.
Okay, it sounds to me like the 15th was the first choice, but we have one board member who has said no.
Sorry, say that again?
I heard the 15th was a first choice for Mrs. Rosario, but Dr. Schiff is not available. So is there a?
I can make the 14th or the 16th available,
Okay.
either one.
Okay.
Just the Tuesdays are so much better for me because I've
Sure.
already secured
Sure,
childcare and.
Sure.
But if Tuesday is
thank you
not
for your
okay, then
flexibility.
certainly the 14th or the 16th, I
Okay.
have enough time to
Okay.
plan.
Will this be during the day or in the evening?
Well,
That is
that's the
something
question.
that we have to discuss. I know that we need to have the courtesy of giving the teachers and the employees opportunity to be here. So my suggestion would be no earlier than 5.
Excuse me. That, Mrs. D'Agresta, the question is that, does this need to be during the day or in the evening? And the comment is that being respectful of the teachers, that it would not be before 5 o'clock.
And that is completely within the discretion of the school board, the timing of the hearing. There's no, you'll remember some of your budget final hearings have to be after 5 o'clock. That's not the case for this type of a hearing. You can decide the time that you wish to start your hearing, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm in support of Mrs. Zorik's suggestion that it be after 5 o'clock so that teachers and other staff can be here if they'd like. I'm available any of the dates that were suggested.
I am too. Any of the dates.
Dr. Schiff?
Tough week. Monday. I was supposed to that's a challenging week. If that's the only week, I will arrange my life for Monday or Wednesday. What day would you prefer, Monday or Wednesday? I would prefer not that
Mrs.
week.
Berenborg?
The only date I have a problem with is Wednesday afternoon. I have a follow-up appointment in Orlando. So I will not be in
So
town.
Monday?
So it's looking like Monday, October 14th.
Dr. Schiff? The 14th? Can you make it work?
Do we have school that day? Does our district have school that, that's Columbus Day?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
And then are we okay, 5 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay. So Monday, the 14th at 5 o'clock.
Thank you so much, board members. I appreciate that, and I'll get something out in writing to you as well. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. So we were able to utilize our time, Dr. Adams, while we were trying to get the copy that we need. But if you want to go ahead and proceed into your presentation.
Thank you, and again, I apologize completely. I think the confusion probably existed with the suggested candidates that people give us names. That was sent, and we had not even intended to discuss that today. So, again, I apologize. I was on the road, but there is no excuse. What I'd like to do is move forward with having you go into the leadership profile, which many of you pulled up initially. The document has been sent. You will have it both on your computer and a hard copy shortly. The document that's missing, so we'll just do that out of sequence. As you look at the leadership profile, there's an executive summary basically that just gives a little history and background of the county and county education. I'd like to bring you really to the document or the piece of the document on page 3 that says participants. Here you can see a breakdown of the participants both in the online survey and in the interviews and individual groups. And you had a total of 169 persons that responded to the online survey and a total of 114 individuals that participated either in focus groups or individual meetings. And you can see the breakdown of the various participants there. I think it's important as you look at a summary and you start to look at the strengths of the district and those things that people value, because we centered all of our questions around really 3 points. One, what do stakeholders value about the district? What do stakeholders want to see maintained and built upon? And then we ask questions about the challenges and then the desired characteristics. So as you look at those and you look at the strengths, the sense of community, community schools, a lot of positive around security and things that have been done, especially in some of the schools with regard to security in the last couple of years, and obviously with all the focus that was brought with the unfortunate incident in Parkland. So there's a feeling in when you actually get to see some of the comments, although only 7 students participated on the online survey, there was a larger group of students that actually participated in a focus group that were representative, I think, across the board, not just leaders that may be a student council and so forth, but I think a nice mix of students. And as we said earlier, that is probably the best part of, now Dr. Brown had the opportunity to fully participate with the students, but I did sit in on a small portion of that meeting. So as we look at the document that's in front of you, I come up now to roughly page 6 where we show the questions, you have the summary. The first group of interviews, we did provide an opportunity. It's something we do as part of our protocols for board members to have a one-to-one interview. 4 of the 5 of you chose to participate in that. And I think as we look at the strengths that were brought out, and this has come out in, I think, a number of the meetings, your strategic partnerships were considered a strength by a majority of you. Community schools, your special programs, i.e. music, CTE programs, the technical college, outstanding community values, all important. And then some of the community programs such as Kids for Hope, Moonshot, Crossover Mission, and so forth were mentioned. Great employees mentioned across the board, standards-based instruction and the potential for greatness. And I think that came out in a lot of the focus groups. The county is large enough and small enough that there are opportunities to go to the next level, whatever you see that next level to be in the leadership you select. Some of the challenges, recruitment and retention of staff. Decreasing enrollment due in part to options. Now, on one hand, we saw that there were a lot of options available. On the other side, there were options that were not available, and thus students or parents of students and students were looking at some of those other options, which then impacts enrollment and impacts some empty seats in some of the schools. Theme throughout all of the groups, but equity for all children in all schools. Negative perceptions and misconceptions by some stakeholder groups. And it was interesting as we looked through some of the detail, when you get into the detail, that there were kudos both for information that was put out, especially to parents, but not as much for staff, and the general community had the least perspective on how they perceive things. And often the sources of the information the general community received their information from were very limited. So it gets into transparency and challenges with transparency. Out of that, and this came up, and obviously I'm focusing for the moment on some of the board member comments, but we continued to hear through multiple groups, including the transportation people we talked to, leadership style similar to Dr. Moxley. You know, you couldn't get away from that. and certainly that's, I think, a compliment, a plus, but it also, I think, tells you something about both the community and the internal stakeholders, what they are viewing in terms of value in the leader and the leadership from the school. It seemed clear that a rookie wasn't going to be successful here. And the next item on the list, and these are not listed in order of preference or on the number of times they came up, but successful superintendent experience at a level of complexity that would enable success here in Indian River County. And I think that's important. Data-driven, and here's the term that came out, but with common sense in making decisions about it. So data-driven with common sense decision-making skills. Standards results person, relationship builder. And relationship builder came up multiple times if you go through the entire list. Now, this is a document that you did have, and you certainly can compare those. Ability to read the climate, and that's important in a leader, and that came up in several places. Again, it came up with some of you as we talked. Ability not to let ego get in the way, and certainly a people person. One of the questions, and no one else got this question, was a question for you, the board, to rate your effectiveness as a board. And on a scale of 1 to 10, and you were kind of hard on yourself, and overall 6+, but when it came to hard issues, you seemed to rate yourself higher and recognize that you jump on the hard issues. Engagement in the work of the board, higher. Getting to work and gel as a board is something that's happening when some of you only together since November, as you look at that. It's something as you look at your own mode of operation and so forth that it may be of value to look at some of those things as you work forward. As we look at the groups and we go now down the list, the next group that we interviewed was the individually, and this was split between Dr. Brown and myself, where you're cabinet members, a total of 9 that we interviewed. And the important thing, I think, is look at what you, the board, members that participated in this portion, said you thought were strengths, challenges, and desired characteristics. Look at what your cabinet says, and then go through the list and look at that. Now, we tried to do that for you as you get to the final document, desired characteristics. But what's the second one down there? Strong leadership, like Dr. Moxley. Choice options, and this seemed to be a double-edged sword. There are choice options and some options outside of services provided directly through the school district, and that got into some other conversations that as you look at new leadership and as you look at leadership overall, and as you take some of this information even after you select the next superintendent, and maybe look at options like smaller learning communities within your high schools, magnets within your high schools, in terms of options for students within the district. So they came out and relationships and staff and your cabinet level in particular thought there was a strong relationship with law enforcement, and that went to the general overall feeling of safety in the schools, which is a positive. Now, unfortunately, you didn't have, and you do now, and we'll talk about this document next, the survey. Now, only 7 students responded to the survey. Almost every one of the disaggregated groups gave you high marks on security within the schools. The 7 students didn't feel quite as secure. But there were only 7, and so they were the 7 that responded to the survey. Little different with the students that were on site and actually expressing their feelings. For them, the actual students on site, you'll see it when you get to that document. Important to them was social and emotional learning as well as achievement. They also rated their academic programs higher than their parent group. So, but you'll see that as you look at this. Again, some of the strengths, collaboration, focusing on what's important. Challenges recognized by that group and several others. You're obviously this is a negotiations year, labor relations, budgeting, and the challenges this year in particular with the legislature meeting earlier, and of course one of the reasons we're working with, part of the reason we're working with the timeline as we are working with it. Potential for rezoning, redistricting, boundaries may be something of a challenge. Again, this may be a challenge for the successor superintendent. The impact of your charter options on budget and enrollment. Need to consider a broader spectrum of district student options, and there's where some of those smaller learning communities came in from that group. So desired characteristics, clear vision, collaborator, fiscally responsible, ability to stay focused and align the strategic plan to actions. Now that came out in several different groups, and that came out in some of the conversation with some of you, came out especially with the cabinet level, and it came out when we met with the leadership of the teacher union. So again, it seems to be an area of common focus and perhaps a challenge that can be turned into a strength. As we go down and look at the various groups, you added a community forum on Friday. That community forum on Friday only had 3 participants, but you made the opportunity available. Most of the discussion that Friday was on equity and equity issues. Now, that was because of the people that came to that meeting. That was part of their primary interest. I just read an article actually last night about equity on page 10 of the whatever the throwaway on Vero Beach is about that, and it quotes, well, that's newspapers that you don't pay for. That's my Dad was in the part of not criticizing, but anyhow, that was a common thread of that particular group. Just want to highlight, without going through all of these, because this is a document that you had. I'll spend a little more time on the one that you didn't have. Your support group was very interesting. Well, only two persons participated from the transportation group. Looking across the board as you look at support groups for recognition and do you value us? We're part of the team. And I thought what was positive about that, we're part of the team. We're part of what makes it happen for the students here in the district. But show us you value us. And value doesn't always come out in compensation, we know that. Value comes out in different ways. That seemed to be a common thread, and again, it seems to be, as you look at what's happened perhaps over the last 6 months, bringing order to the district and bringing recognition to, and some of that is your key leader? Is your key leader approachable? And that came out time and time again. And again, that's something they like about your interim situation right now, approachability. So that tells us something about recruitment and that whole area. I made 4 pages of notes on this one, but again, I want to be respectful that you've had this document, and you'll see when we get to the desired characteristics how we tried to capture a lot of what's in the individual strengths and challenges. The one I would like to jump to, though, is page 23 of that document, and well, actually, we can go right to 22, and we'll look both at the leadership of your support staff, and that I believe the CWA is something like 700 employees, and we did have 6 leaders there. And I think, when they talk about the strengths, obviously, district employees work hard for the benefit of children. It's not for the benefit of keeping the buses running or keeping the buildings clean. They do that for the benefit of students. And I think that's important. That's a good part of the culture. There may be some things in the culture that need to be changed in terms of recognition, but they talked about their own diversity and value and diversity that I thought was important. Security. They complimented changes in the HR department. Challenges, equity issues, management understanding versus management by intimidation. Desired characteristics. Now we get down and dirty, walks the talk. Involved in all aspects of the district. Experience as a superintendent. No different than what cabinet members said. So it gave us some direction as we looked at desired characteristics. The next group, if you go to the next page, is the leadership of your teacher's bargaining unit. Strengths, focus on students. Strategic plan, but when it came to challenges, they talked again about implementation action plans. Teachers, support staff, human resources leadership. Challenges, need to reach out to internal stakeholders before acting. Value, need for a culture of employees feeling valued. Voice in that culture. Effective partnership between governance and leadership that is focused on a student-first philosophy. And then, again, when you looked at desired characteristics, because ultimately that's where we go with all of these things, ability to communicate with all stakeholders. Innovator, understands classroom challenges of today. And that's important. Sometimes we, and I say that because I was in that superintendent's leadership role, the further away we get from the classroom as we see the cultural changes today, what some of the challenges are, I think important. Confident but not cocky, ability to see and understand the big picture. leader who sets employees up for success. Ability to break down silos. The silos came up in a number of places. And again, that will be a challenge for current leadership as well as the leadership of the future. Ability to create a culture in which staff feel and believe leadership has their backs. Ability to be a uniting force for equity and in and between schools and each student on a real basis. So I thought that was important. We had a lot of focus groups, a lot of information. There are 26 pages of it, which will be public. We have not put it on the portal yet. It was sent out in board docs. As soon as this meeting is complete, that will go on the portal, and I assume will be up on the website for anyone to see it. Any questions on this piece? Because this is only a piece of the puzzle to get to desired characteristics.
Can I just clarify, there is, we already have this document on the superintendent search of the homepage, so it's on the board docs. So,
But it is
It
public
is
right now.
Okay.
Speaking this,
okay,
you're a little too far from
am
me.
I? Okay.
I did have a question, I don't know.
Okay, we're going to start down there and we'll come this way.
Thank you. I did not see the survey itself. I know we had a one-on-one, so I appreciate your time, and I was able to say whatever I wanted. My concern is that some people have come to me and said that they did take the survey and that there wasn't an opportunity to provide comments. The other concern I have is that Friday, September 13th meeting, there were only 3 participants. That's the one that we had asked for, the extra. I believe I asked for it to be during the evening, but it was made during at 10 o'clock on a Friday, the 13th. And it was only noticed 3 days prior. So I know that we didn't get the turnout we wanted for the community input. And there have been some community people that have reached out to me and said, how can we give input? Is there an email that they can be able to send it to so that they're anonymous?
We can, I can create an email to make that happen.
Okay.
The problem is that we're looking for direction to get desired characteristics approved. Now, the first public forum, which only had 13 people, that was advertised a week in advance.
There was a hurricane, though, that was approaching us, so I do know that that was a problem.
Yeah.
The only reason why I bring that up is because I want, and I know all the board members want to be able to have citizens be heard. And I think just to have them being heard is important. And it's one thing to call one of us and say it, but it's also another thing to be able to say it anonymously.
We can do that via an email as long as it's understood that we won't be responding to those emails.
Right.
We'll take the information and we'll put it up
And it
that
might be
way.
the same as what's here, but I just want the opportunity, since we did not have the turnout that we were hoping for the community turnout, that there was another way that we could get community input.
And with regard to the survey and individual comments, we did remove that from our process because it is a research-based survey, and we do not take responsibility for redacting comments. And often, when we used to take the comments on the survey, there'd be negative comments about employees. And if it was anything that was missed that could affect a promotion or one's status as an employee, that becomes a matter of potential litigation. So at the public forums, certainly that kind of thing can be made available. The only thing I would say about us creating an email address, which we can do, I've done this for instance, for when there are public forums and people want to pose questions to candidates. Because this is Florida, if those emails come in and there's anything negative and they have to be made public, again, somebody's got to take responsibility internally to redact those.
I know, it's a quandary. I just have a concern about the fact that we only had input from 16 people in a live forum that were community members. That to me is either a good indication that people trust us and that we're going to do the right thing, or it's possibly wasn't put out there enough and that we didn't get the input that we were desiring.
Well, you did have over 800 people that responded to the survey.
I
Would-
did have people, though, that contacted me and said, I wish I could have put in a comment or a suggestion or something like that. And these are people that, you know, I know and trust in the community that have a real desire to see us get the right person. Not that somebody else wouldn't, but you mentioned negative comments and all that. I don't think they want to slight. I think they want to suggest. And so I just want to put it out there that I felt like we didn't get the community input that we could get.
Okay.
I have a question about the board responses. Is there a typo here? Because I saw the number 4, that only 4 board members met with you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. That's kind of,
It was open to any board member that wished to schedule a meeting, and 4 board members did.
okay.
It's not a mandate, it
Okay.
was an opportunity.
I didn't know if that was a typo.
No.
Okay. And then are we, I don't know if I missed you mentioning that we were going to review the desired characteristics. Are we going to go through this? Because I have some suggestions on those characteristics that you all suggested. When will we have an opportunity to do that? Is that now, or should I hold on to my?
The intent today is to do just that. That's the last document we'll talk about.
Okay, so we're going to.
From a sequence standpoint, unfortunately, our mess up, I prefer to discuss the survey, then this document,
Okay.
and then the desired characteristics. The desired characteristics, ultimately, the reason we're here today is to talk about
Right.
that, and that's really where the discussion will be.
That's fine. I just didn't know if I should mention it right this second or if we should wait. So I'll wait for my comments for the desired characteristics.
It would probably be more effective to do it at that time.
Sure. Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I too have a lot of comments when we get to that. In reviewing these, I'm wondering, you've mentioned a lot of characteristics here. Can you tell me if it's included, can you tell me how we distinguish, or if you distinguish between a characteristic that was mentioned by an individual or characteristics on which there was some kind of consensus both within group and across groups?
We look for consensus across groups more than consensus within. How many times was it mentioned by a group? Often, and it depends on the numbers. Often, if it's mentioned 5 times, we'll try to put it in, or 4 times. It just depends on what the universe is, how many times. But yeah, we do look for patterns, absolutely.
And forgive me, because I know I've looked at this. Is that summarized in the end? Here, where you've said these are the patterns that occurred across groups?
That's in the desired characteristics, the 3rd document that we're going to talk about.
The desired characteristics, which is that one-page sheet.
Correct.
And that, in that document, is where you pulled together the characteristics on which you saw consensus across groups.
Correct.
Okay? I think what I'm struck by here, and this is a bigger conversation, not just in this particular document, but not dissimilar to what Mrs. Barrenborg mentioned. I mean, I know we all wanted an evening meeting. We worked with what we had. We are simultaneously under some time pressure to get this done so that we start someone in a timely way. And there's a part of me that wants to be really conscientious and slow the process down. And at some point, I'd like us to just work that through a bit. There are a number of things that are happening. There are a lot of moving parts about this, and I'm noticing things. For example, like I'm going to look at this document as we talk about it. But when we talk about how these come out, they're really significant to our decision-making moving forward. So I'm voicing that just as something I want to voice now, and we can come back to it or not as my fellow board members see fit. But I understand the difficulty in balancing both limited time and limited of your time, but this is not a decision that I personally am willing to in any way push beyond what at least I personally am comfortable with, and I assume my fellow board members feel the same. So we can talk about that as we go forward. I would want to address more some of that comment issue. And while I know that you continue to refer to that this is a research-based survey, and as a researcher, I don't disagree with you, I'm also conscious that what we're doing here is a community process, not an academic research project. So I want to be as sensitive as we can to getting as much input as we can. The intent of this process is a little bit different. And I completely value that we want, and I respect that we have that we're using a survey that has research integrity. Totally, completely agree with that. And want to be sensitive on what our intentions and our purpose here is. So as we go through, I don't want to take up more time, but we can maybe look at and talk through some of that as well. That's all I have at the moment.
We received 869 survey results. I'm kind of anxious to get to the survey results to go through that as well.
Mrs. Zork, I have one little typo. Just in case somebody's Googling this and they'd want to know, it's Kids at Hope, not Kids for Hope. And that is a research-based program that's out there, so I know that when somebody goes to Google it, they're not going to find that.
It's kids.
At Hope. Thank you.
Okay.
Just to kind of frame the rest of our time together, we're going to now move to the document that's the survey results.
Correct.
And then I think ultimately, this is where we're going to have our most discussion, is the one-pager. Because this is what is going to be used to recruit and to be published for the advertisement. And the other question, I think I know the answer to it, but I'm going to ask it anyways, because this isn't the only time that the public is going to be able to be part of the process, because they're going to be able to be observers during the interview process. You know, I'm sure there's conversations that will be had. Am I to understand? I mean, because we're in Florida, when the interview process is occurring, that's going to be able for the public to actually be in the audience to observe that.
Absolutely. This part of the process is to get the front-end input. This document, the 26-page document, has more value when the person's selected in terms of a read on the feel of the different groups, where some of the strengths are, where some of the challenges are. It's used to help guide that third page, as is the document we're going to talk about now. Because the interviews will take place in public, there is obviously an opportunity for the public to be present, either, I assume, electronically or in person. There is also the possibility, depending on what the board may decide at that time, if you want some type of a public forum for questions. Now, we would advise on how that's most effective, but again, that would be your choice as a board.
Thank you.
All right, now you should have the survey document in front of you, either electronically or a hard copy, in a paper copy. This document is research-based, and I'd like to just focus on a couple of parts of it, then talk about the disaggregation of data and what your group said and how that matches some of the people we talked to. I think it's important, though, to actually focus for a minute on the methodology, and that is the four areas: vision and values, teaching and learning, community engagement, and management. And without, you know, the risk, because there are people either in the audience or watching electronically, I am going to paraphrase what's here. The vision and values, we look at the leader's ability to provide a clear and compelling vision for the future, align district programs to the broader vision of the district, and uphold high expectations for all stakeholders. That's what we look at as vision and values. Teaching and learning becomes the part, this is where it happens face-to-face with students, but the leader's ability to guide the educational programs, make data-driven decisions, and implement effective instructional change as needed. Community engagement part is more than just being visible in the community. We look at it as the leader's ability to be the voice of the district, to be able to engage with the community, not just be seen, and involve stakeholders in realizing the district's vision, the vision part of it being critical. And then the management piece, that's the ability to guide the operations, manage the resources, recruit and retain highly effective personnel, and to create an equitable accountability system for all employees. Everything is divided into those four groups as you look through this. So as you get to the next piece of it, the executive summary, I think it's important to note that parents and guardians of students were over half of the respondents, a little over 52%, almost 53% were parents and guardians of students attending the schools. Your teachers were the next largest group, almost 25%, 24.6%. And then the third largest participant group were your support staff, about 12.7%. So if you looked at the district strengths that came up, and you'll see these broken down when you look at the analysis, but the ones that came up the most, technology is integrated into the classrooms. District schools are safe, the same theme that we saw in some of the other ones. Facilities are well maintained. The district employs effective teachers, administrators, and support staff in the schools. Employees are held accountable to high standards. And then you'll see where they're broken down. The first one, technology is teaching and learning. District schools are safe, teaching and learning. Facilities is a management. District employees employs effective teachers and administrators, management. Employees are held accountable, management. Now, the top-rated leadership characteristics that came up in this: foster a positive professional climate of mutual trust and respect amongst faculty, staff, and administrators. Again, that plays to community engagement. Recruit, employ, and retain effective personnel throughout the district, management. Effectively plan and manage long-term financial health of the district, management. And then understanding of educational research and emerging best practices, again being your vision and values piece. And then provide transparent communication, community engagement. So that's kind of what that's your summary or your executive summary. Do the copies you have for the next piece of this, the State of the District summary, are they color-coded?
No.
Okay, if they're not color-coded, you have to look at this on your computer. And I'm only going to share this with you and suggest that you go back and look at this as far as your groups. You can see, and we show this two ways, and I think the second methodology is probably a little clearer without getting you involved in 6 different colors and try to coordinate those. But I thought it was interesting as you look at vision and values. Your administrators are, if you look at vision and values from the right side in, your administrators are second in, but your students are first. Now, there were only 7 students that responded. But the students had the highest rating of vision and values, highest rating of community engagement, and highest rating of management. You can go back.
I just had a quick question, Mrs. Zork, may I ask? When you had the students here to do the focus group, did they take the survey then as well?
No,
So that's unfortunate. Okay,
they did not.
thank you.
But you can see that, I'm going to show you a different picture of this. I think it's easier to see than the dots. The same thing happens with the leadership profile by the constituent groups. You can see the clusters where people were and where they come out. But as you look at the leadership profile details, we can see this. I think there's a better picture of this. So if you go to the next page, page 5, this is where some express, well, how do you just pick 4? I like 6, I like 5, I like 7. You know, we indicated that the 4 are all tied around those four basic premises. So we try to look at the top one in each one. I mentioned that to some of you that one of our competitors, for instance, in Hillsborough, they have 33 characteristics, and you pick out 10 of them. There's another competitor, they have 28, and you pick out 7. They're not research-based. As I mentioned, these are based on those 4 areas, plus the ISLIC standards as revised in the professional leadership standards for the chief state school officers. What's important here, as you look at the top 4 all the way across the board, and you can see this whether you're color-coded or not, foster a positive professional climate of mutual trust and respect among faculty, staff, and administrators. 55% of all 869 rated that is one of their top 4. Your administrators, that was one of their top, your community members, your non-instructional staff, your parents, and your teachers, all considered that high. It was not one of the top ones for your 7 students that responded. Recruit, employ, retain effective personnel throughout the district. Again, 43% of all respondents, and again, the same top groups had that. Consistency across. Effectively plan and manage long-term health of the district. Your parents were not as high and with your students, but again, one of the top ones for administrators, your community members, your non-instructional staff, and your teachers. And then you can go down the list, and that's where all of them rated out to where, for instance, provide a clear and compelling vision for the future. The only ones that had that as top were your students. The next one is your State of the District item analysis. Overall, please rate the overall quality of the education in the district. 38% either rated at a 5 or a 4. That's a Likert scale of strongly agree or agree. Your administrators, 48%. Community members, only 24%. Non-instructional staff, 41%. Parent of a guardian of a student, 40%. The 7 students, only 29%, 34% of your teachers. And then as you go down, the vision and values and those statements, again, you can see the district provides a clear and compelling vision of for the future. Now, this is the flip of when we ask about strengths. So you have 34%, 40% of your administrators rated that a 5 or a 4. 18% of community members, again, the lowest, but it's also the group that talks about the way they get information about the district and how they perceive the district based on the way they get information about the district. Your non-instructional staff.
So may I have a question, or may I ask a question on that? Sure. During the focus groups, did you get more information about that how the community members are getting information from was there discussion about that? Like, because I'm sure some of the things that come up in the survey are things that are echoed when you do the focus groups, where you see some parallels or connections. Is that the case?
Yeah, most of the community members were getting their information from third and fourth-hand sources. They were not getting a lot of the information from internal stakeholders. Yet, your internal stakeholders talked about the communication being effective. Some of it's coming from the media, and media interpretation. The article I read last night that talked about the meeting that was held on the 3rd, basically, as I read the article, it talks about the desired characteristics, like the board already met and decided on those characteristics, and you're doing that today. So how the community gets information is a challenge as you going forward. Whether it's as you look at the skill set in terms of the successor superintendent, and are there other ways? And part of what we did here is celebrate more the successes of your students and of your staff. And the more that you can celebrate that, and you do that not just on the website, but in the kinds of interaction with the community, that will probably help in getting the information out about the positive things about the district. Again, as you look at this, you go through teaching and learning, and we look at the highest ones, and I thought it was, again, go down to the 3rd one. District schools are safe. 63% of all respondents. 72% of your administrators, 47% even of your community members that tended to rank in other ways lower. 65% of your non-instructional staff, 63% of your parents positive there. And your students, 43% on the survey. Teachers, 64%. So again, that in terms of the Likert scale was very high. Interesting, students are on track to be college and career ready. Only 36% favorable. Your administrators, 36%. But your community, 15%. Your non-instructional staff higher, your teachers at 40%. Your parents right around 39%. So pretty consistent.
Students feel ready, though. 57% of students, that was the highest.
Mm-hmm. But again, it's a small sample there. We don't use non-parametric statistics, so you can take a small sample and project, but it's not like you're doing a national sample with 1,500 people selected, and even there they mess up. This is it's a source of information. It's a source to help guide us, to help guide the characteristics, but it's also a source when you start working with the next superintendent as part of your transition phase, sharing this kind of information. On management, facilities well maintained. That's consistent. It was consistent in the leadership profile meetings, and it's consistent in the survey, 58%. And while there was talk about recruitment and retention being very important and being considered a challenge, the district employs effective teachers, administrators, 55% positive. And you can see across the board there where the numbers were. Then if you go to, again, both of these charts, Appendix 2, this reflects a lot clearer than those dots that I asked you to kind of go by. Here's a leadership profile item analysis. And again, this was to the 4 statements that people deem most important. And foster a positive professional climate, 55% of all respondents, 80% of your administrators, 53% of your community members, 69% of your non-instructional staff, 41% of parents, and of the students that participated, 43%, and your teachers, 73%. Thought that was important in terms of the statements about selecting the next superintendent. Recruit and employ and retain effective personnel throughout the district. You can see across the board community members rated that high, and yet they rated it low on the other side when they looked at challenges. I think this one didn't come up as high, but certainly was consistent throughout, and that's understand and be sensitive to the needs of a diverse student population. Only 30% overall, and community members were only at 20%, and yet that was one of the more common themes in some of the focus groups.
But look at the student number. Look at the student percentage on that.
Well, it tells you a lot about the community members that applied for this, that did the survey. I mean, where they're
Right.
getting their information from, and
Same thing about the students that
Yeah.
filled it out.
So this is, these are the results of the survey.
Mrs. Zork, I have a question. Go ahead. This question is kind of for Dr. Moxley, and just as we move on, and we're going to discuss this one page, but I'm curious, when you look at Appendix 1, under management, the fourth one down, employees are held accountable to high standards. You have 28% of administrators saying that they agree or strongly agree with that. If administrators aren't, who's to be holding employees accountable for high standards? If administration feels it's only 28%, like, what does that say to you?
That's an interesting statistic. I don't have the value of knowing the background or why the perception is that way.
Right.
But that seemed to, when I looked at some of the other information, that kind of came out in some other ways, but that is low to me,
Yeah,
to be honest.
because I would think
Yeah.
they would be the ones that would
Yeah.
be, yeah, okay.
But there are other, administrators, that we have other professional managerial that are also supervisors
Sure.
that may not have been in that category. But yes, I find that as a low statistic, to answer your question.
There were also only 25 administrators
Right.
who took the survey, so that makes a big.
Correct, so,
that makes a difference in terms of, in comparison to how many we have in total,
Right.
25, you mentioned earlier about the small sample size.
it's about,
Yeah. There
about a
were
third.
19 principals in one principals group, and I believe 17 in another principals, assistant principals group, I think elementary and assistant secondary principal. So it's probably the 20, and we don't know whether the same 25 or the same 19 responded to.
right.
And again, it's a matter of caring and interest and how important it is, whether a person takes the time and
Right.
completes the survey or does not.
Go ahead, and then Mrs. Barrenborn.
In your, what I notice in this is that in the all category, there's not really great consensus on anything. The highest we have is 55% on foster a positive professional climate. Is that consistent with your experience about how these come out in other districts? For me, when I look at all of these numbers, there's very few numbers above 50%. And when they are, they're often in small groups. And so it suggests to me that this is kind of all, like, A, it's kind of all over the board. B, of course, we want everything in one person. I'm wondering if you can, if that's typical on what you get in response to these surveys, or if there's something different about Indian River County.
The only time we would get a significant difference, if it's really broken, we'll get where there are serious problems in the community. And there'll be a consensus, we need change, we want change now, and then it'll pop out that it'll push into the 60s, 63, 65%. But this is not atypical in terms of the responses.
Can I follow up with that?
Sure.
Because your reflection that if there's clear consensus in the community of we need change, you would see higher numbers in each category. Is it possible that kind of the flip side of that, and I don't know how we get at this, I don't even know if we do, that when we don't see numbers like that, there's either we're kind of all over map or there's some kind of divisiveness or divide, right? Some people think X, some people think Y, so it kind of comes out in the middle. But people strongly think X or strongly think Y. Is there any way of digging into that?
The only thing beyond what we have in the analysis provided here is our own observations in terms of what we saw reflected in how passionate some people were in terms of the focus groups versus I'm here because I need to be here because I care and I just want to be represented. I think a sense that we got, especially from some of the people that were very compassionate about taking the district to the next level, is that, yeah, we're doing an okay job, but we could be the best in Florida. So there's some of that. I think there's the other piece of it is the equity piece, and there's no question that there's some things that people feel very strongly about when it comes to achievement gaps. And I think the other common thing is probably additional options beginning at the middle school up. And that's just now personal from what Dr. Brown shared with me, and then what I saw personally with the groups that I met with, and then in reviewing the data that came in.
And to clarify, when you say additional options, you mean, for example, specialized programs in schools or magnet programs? Can you be more specific on what you mean by that?
Well, I got a sense from some of the conversations and that one of the reasons you're losing students to other options are that you don't offer those options, meaning the district doesn't provide those options. Thus, if you had one way to address that is to create smaller learning opportunities within the high school, within even the middle schools, magnets within the high school, not apart from, but within. And we've seen that be done very successfully in school districts. So when that comes up in conversation, especially if it comes up one-to-one, the people that hang around after the focus group's over, you start talking about those things.
Mrs. Sorkin, ask a follow-up.
Mrs. Berenberg had a question.
Thank you,
and then-
thank you. Can we go back to the management piece where it says employees are held to accountable high standards? Just an FYI, it's kind of interesting to look at this data flat out, but if you notice, administrators and community members are in line with each other, 28% and 29%, and students and teachers are in line with each other, 71% and 68%. It's interesting that teachers and students feel like employees are being held accountable to higher standards than community members and administrators, and I'll leave it at that. You can dwell on that. The other thing I wanted to say is I did see that other document where people were allowed to give a name or whatever, and although I am flattered that somebody put my name out there, I will say that I am not qualified to become a superintendent, nor I can't speak on any of the other community members' names that were out there, but I really feel like it's great that you just talked about somebody that we need to be an innovator.
Right.
And that's the word that I keep coming back to, is we need an innovator. Can I bring up the idea that we talked about with the superintendent in Kentucky? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. He gave me some information about a superintendent in Kentucky that gives a flash drive to each parent who has a newborn child in the hospital. And on that flash drive is information to help those parents prepare their child for school. And I thought, wow, there's an innovator. Is he available? He's not. But
3 years.
there you go. So I just feel like that's the kind of thing that I'm seeing in this report that I know I have conveyed that information is we need an innovator. We're in those times where you're right, we are competing with other schools and other programs, and we need an innovator. So I'm glad that that's come out in this. Thank you.
If I may, the individual is Dr. Randy Poe in Boone County, Kentucky, which is a suburb of Cincinnati, but in Kentucky. That's where the airport is. And doing some fantastic work. And one of the things they do is to make sure that every time a child is born in the county, the parents get a flash drive that tell them this is what you need to do to get ready for school.
Okay. Are we ready to move on to?
Mrs. Zork, I had a
Oh,
comment.
sorry, go
No,
ahead.
that's fine. So I heard some conversation regarding some of the feedback and what people had said, you know, what they wanted as far as choice or magnet programs or different things like that. I guess really what I wanted to kind of get at the heart of it is how that affects your recruiting. So Mrs. Barenborg said innovator. Not anything against you, but your ideas are great, but you're not going to be our superintendent. So how do you use this information now to help you to recruit someone like it? You know, if you're hearing innovator, how does this help you now?
Well, we look at, certainly as we begin the vetting process, the first thing we look at is the letter of introduction. Why do they want to be the superintendent? And then what can they do in 2 or 3 paragraphs? Because once they go beyond 1 page, they lose it. So what can they tell us in that letter of introduction? And then what are they doing in their district? Now, on the application, one of the things in that expandable application, they can put in the programs that are being operated within the district. So we can look at innovator, and then that becomes, if we know that that's a sense of the board, when we interview people, that's part of what we ask. So that's why the discussion beyond what's on the paper is important for us to have.
All right, we ready to move on to our desired
No,
characteristics?
I think the one you've been waiting for is the single sheet, the desired characteristics. Now, as you start to look at the desired characteristics, I believe there are 24 bullets there. That's a lot. And there are a couple that are somewhat repetitive that we couldn't separate out. There may be some that you don't want in here. There may be some that you want to add. But I thought as you look at and look through this, and this is a document that you've had, successful executive level experience and child-centered philosophy that guides all decisions. That's saying a lot in that opening, that one. And again, these are not in 1 to 24. They're 24 bullets. That's why they're not numbered. But ability to analyze and improve the culture and climate in the district and improve the public perception of the district. Well, many of the comments that or exchange of comments we've had in the last half hour or so have been around that very one.
Go
Sorry.
ahead.
I just don't know at what point, what our plan is in terms of providing feedback. If we're going to go bullet by bullet, I think that would be great, because in that first bullet, for example, you said successful executive level experience. I'd like to add in there successful educational executive level experience. I'd like that educational experience to be in there, because you can find, you know, executive level experience in Exxon Gas, you know, Mobil, and that's not someone that would be, you know, an applicant, in my opinion. You need to have the educational background for that. So at what
So-
point, what's the plan in terms
Well,
of providing feedback for that?
I'm going to ask, how do you typically do it in the?
This would be the time to begin a discussion. I guess I'm somewhat sensitive because you didn't have the one document. This document you've had, so however you want to begin the input process.
So that's my first. So if
Okay.
we want to go bullet by bullet, it makes it easier that
Okay,
way.
so input on the first, Dr. Schiff.
I'm sorry, I have a clarifying question, because I have a lot on this.
Me too.
I have a lot, both in terms of substantive issues as well as simply editorial stuff, and I will acknowledge, to my detriment, I'm a harsh editorial critic. So I'm wondering how we, are we just going to go full force with you?
Yes.
Okay, and we're just going to plow through?
I have
Okay,
a
got it.
question, though. It says, this is desired characteristics. Underneath requirements, it says successful education leadership experience, educational leadership experience. So that's a requirement. So speaking to Mrs. Rosario's point, that's a get your foot in the door already that we've stated, correct? as a requirement.
So then we should just remove it
Well, but I think, but
if we're repeating it twice.
No.
I just wanted to note that it was mentioned as a
I
requirement.
think from an HR standpoint, your requirements are your non-negotiables.
Right.
So where, you don't, if you don't
Yeah,
want it
but-
stated
no, I
twice,
understand.
make sure it's stated there.
Where you want it.
Yeah.
So if we're on the first one, I had heard in the past, the board talk about wanting someone that had superintendent experience and not someone that's gonna come in and on-job training. You know, is that, if that was one of our desires, wouldn't it be in that first sentence?
I would imagine it would
Someone
be
with
under a requirement.
superintendent. Are you suggesting someone with superintendent experience?
and I think I would.
Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, it's my desire, so it's, you know, it's really the privilege of the entire board, not just mine.
Just, but wait,
Let's
but
go.
I'm sorry. Can you just,
Well,
like, let's
here-
say for number one, like the first bullet, what are you suggesting?
What my thoughts are, requirements, if we put it there, that's a non-negotiable. But what happens if we have someone like the
Oh, I'm
Commissioner
down
of
here, okay.
Education that wants to apply, and he or she might not have ever had superintendent experience, so I would not want to not look at them, but it is something that I do desire, is that someone at least have, is the superintendent experience.
And so in the first bullet, you're suggesting,
Successful superintendent experience.
yeah, school superintendent or educational facility superintendent? I
Is
mean,
it
it makes a
very
big
Can I
difference?
difference.
chime in on this? Yeah, because I did feel that way too.
Yeah.
However, after looking at some things that are out there and doing some research, perhaps we can label it this way, experienced superintendent or assistant superintendent in a turnaround or innovative district preferred.
Where are you, in the requirements or in the first bullet?
I'm on my own notes here. I'm looking at, if you're looking at that first one, or at the bottom, which however you feel, Dr. Adams, that it belongs, I think we've heard that we like Dr. Moxley. We like her experience. We like her demeanor. Yeah, we want to clone her, but we're not there yet. So I think looking at putting it out there is, I don't think we should limit ourselves to superintendent experience only, because there might be a dynamic assistant superintendent that has worked under a dynamic superintendent that's doing some innovative things.
But that's still superintendent experience.
It's
Assistant
assistant
superintendent,
superintendent
it's still,
experience.
it's
This is-
still
It's
some
executive
experience.
level experience. So I think if you leave it at executive level experience, preferred, I think the preferred word is what you're looking at.
I mean, no, I think we're distinguishing between required and desired.
Desire.
Correct.
This is a list of desired, it's not
Correct.
mandatory. When we get down here, if certain things are non-negotiable, we put them there. But when we talk about desires, it's there, here's our wish list.
Right.
So I think we may be confusing those two things.
I get that.
And my thoughts are, because we've not really had a chance to talk about this, is we know having someone that has had the experience of working with a board,
Yes.
a school board, you know, an assistant superintendent doesn't have that exact experience that the superintendent has had that experience of doing it. And I really have, over the last 5 or 6 months, seen a great value in how she's able to work with us, because she has 9 years of that. And so, not that I'm ruling out a great assistant superintendent, but that is something that how do you get past that?
Can I make
I
a
think in the
suggestion?
interviews at the end, we get
Right.
past that.
Right.
Can we just put in a bullet that says previous superintendent experience strongly preferred?
Yes.
Or preference given to those with previous superintendent experience? It's a desired, it's not a mandatory.
It's a desire, it's not a requirement. Okay?
I also don't want HYA not to bring a really great candidate to us.
I'm sure they're not going to do that.
And that's not.
I know, I just
This
want
does
it-
not rule that out.
I want him to understand that, though, that when you see that that's preferred, maybe not on all 5 of us. I feel like if we have a dynamo out there, that may have had some board experience, but not weekly board experience. We can decipher that when we get to the final interviews. I think that's where we decipher that. I just would hate to not consider somebody that might be a dynamo that's out there.
And
And
I
I don't have
agree.
anybody in mind, I'm just
No,
looking at.
I agree with
out
you.
there.
And I agree with you.
Can I just speak to that too? You know, there have been suggestions in the past of people that might be able to serve as a superintendent here in Indian River County. And I think what I've seen in general, and I've seen in Dr. Moxley, and I saw with Dr. Rendell too, an understanding of that building level administrator position is invaluable. Understanding what the work of a principal is, it's one of the hardest, and the teachers. So, you know, when Mrs. Rosario speaks about educational experience, it is valuable in many different ways. So definitely, you know, senior leadership and some type of education. But I agree with you, if Pam Stewart wants to apply for this job and she'd like to come and serve,
Right,
you know, will she be ruled out? Absolutely not.
right. So I don't want to make that a requirement.
You know what?
She was an assistant in St. John's before she became commissioner.
Right.
I think also, it is true, I'll speak for myself, not other board members, when applicants come in, I will err on the side of previous board experience. I think if we put something in here that says that, we're being clear and transparent about it. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean I'm not going to look at anybody else.
Just means
But
it's
it
a
does mean if I
preference.
see two people who have good credentials, and one has been a superintendent and one has not. Now, that said, there are many small districts around the country where people are superintendents in districts that have one high school and one middle school, and that's not the superintendent we're looking for. So this is, that may not be, let me clarify, that may not be the superintendent we're looking for. So there is a fine line here, but I don't think there's anything wrong with us stating what our preference is. We're not mandating anything, and we're not asking anybody, we're not telling people we're not going to look if they are not that person.
So I just want to say to Dr. Adams then at that point, because I think what Dr. Schiff brings up is an important point. Across the country, superintendent means different things. So when you're listening, do you have an idea really in who you're looking for, I guess, as far as size or scope of experience?
Well, it certainly has to be someone that has an experience with an organization with the complexity of the district. You know, we've been talking small in terms of Florida, large counties, but it's still a larger school district than many of the school districts, especially in the Northeast, where 10,000 students would be considered a very large school district. So we're aware of that. The 24 are based on the survey and the information and discussion with you, the 24 that we came out with as being the most prevalent. That, and we tried to use the language that came to us. So we didn't wordsmith this a whole lot, number one. It's unlikely we're going to get someone that has all 24 characteristics. So let's be realistic to that part of it. And there are some things that become very important in terms of clarity. Right now, people inquiring that have not put anything in terms of an application, either for not submitting, meaning they've got it in the system but didn't press the button. I've had phone calls. We've had phone conversations. I have an inquiry from a superintendent from a Florida district that is much smaller than this district, but it has 7 years superintendent experience. I've got an inquiry from a very large county from a regional superintendent. The region that individual is responsible for is at least 10 times the size of this district. So you look at all of that in the statement that superintendent means something different in different places, but generally the leadership role expected of a superintendent, whether it's a district of 1,000 or a district of 605,000 as Los Angeles is, functions are very similar in terms of the leadership responsibilities. So it's important that you capture what it is this community needs now and for the future.
So ideally, you want to see us, would you like to see less than 24? Is 24 too much? What do you think?
I think, I believe, whatever you're comfortable with, we wouldn't have presented this today if we weren't comfortable with it. So if you need to do wordsmithing to make yourself more comfortable, that's fine. For us, all we need is the direction. We want to formally, we've been talking to people, we've been recruiting people, but we want to formally get started. I need something by tomorrow morning to get you in Ed Week next week. That's 7 days away. And if we don't get it in tomorrow morning, we don't get in Ed Week for the next issue.
And just for clarification from the attorney, if we can have consensus here on this today. It does not need to go to a vote. Is that correct?
Yes, if the board can reach consensus today during this workshop, that's fine,
Because it's not on the agenda for tonight.
to give the direction to the consultant, yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, I have a few. So at the end of our input with this, will you be able to summarize for us what you're taking notes on so we know that we're on the same page in terms of our feedback for how we want some wordsmithing or some changes, some additions, for example, what Dr.
as
Schiff
long-
just mentioned with regard to preference for superintendent experience?
As long as, when it's done, there's the, and I'm hoping to make the changes right on here with the electronic copy I have.
So-
But if it comes out that one board member says, I want this change, and then another one says, well, I don't like the word education, it should be teacher leader, then I need some direction where there's a sense that everybody's comfortable without taking a vote on all 24 bullets.
Well, we're going on consensus, so when you see consensus, when you hear consensus, or if you don't know, please just clarify, do I have consensus to change it to X, Y, Z?
right.
But then at the end, my question is, at the end, will you, of course, that's if we're all on the same page with that. At the end, though, will you be able to review for us what you're adding, editing, or changing, or whatever? Okay, and then my other comment with that is bullet number 1. We're still on bullet number 1. My preference would be to add educational in there, but where it says executive level experience and a child-centered, I would like an executive level experience with a child-centered philosophy. Someone who has, I'd like to change that. I'd also like to say that I'm sure that we can get through, this today. I'm hoping that we'll all be able to get through this today so that it can get into the Ed Week next week. But I'd also like to throw in that I'm kind of with Dr. Schiff on the fact that I don't want to rush through this either. And if it needs to, just saying, if it needs to get into the following Ed Week, then so be it. But my personal goal is for us to be able to get through it today. But that said, I want us to get it right.
Dr. Schiff had a comment on number 1?
On number 1.
Okay.
I'd like to change the wording of a child-centered philosophy that guides all decisions to dedicating and dedication to meeting the needs of all children. Personally, I think it's more succinct, and I don't know unless there's a catchphrase for what a child-centered. So I'm going to preface this by saying, in a lot of these, I think some of the wording is vague. So in some of my responses, I'm either going to ask what some of those things mean, or I'm going to suggest alternative wording that I think characterizes and makes it less vague. That said,
Wording again?
so this says a child-centered philosophy that guides all decisions. I kind of think, like, we know that. There are a number of things here that I think we know. But I would, personally, I would say this is, again, consensus, dedication to meeting the needs of all children. That would be my preferred language.
Mrs. Justice and Mrs. Berenberg?
And that said, if people don't like it, I don't want to haggle over every word.
Okay.
Kids first. I like child-centered. I like that, sometimes decisions that are best for kids make adults angry, and that's just too bad. Child
When,
centered.
when you reach a consensus, I'll write it down. But let me say this. Ask yourself this question. Is it going to make a difference in the quality of the candidates we get? If it is, then we want to be sure that every word is spot on.
Right.
If not, then, you know, we'll do whatever you choose to do.
Can I respond to that for a second? It may not, but it does make a difference in how we present ourselves as a district. And I'm also concerned with that. So how we communicate as a district and as a board, and the thoroughness and specificity with which we do that, I do think matters in terms of how we are perceived. Is it going to change, necessarily every candidate? Maybe not. But how we look to that candidate, it may have some influence on, or not, but that's my thought.
Mrs. Berenberg?
I'm concerned about time. I'm looking at our agenda,
Yep.
and I'm looking at 24 bullet points here, and I'm looking at, is that what,
Okay.
the best use of our time right now?
Sure. So the other items on our agenda, I will move, I've already put the staff on alert. This was the priority for the day because Dr. Adams is here, and we have paid for his time. This is one of our days, and I'm very sensitive to the budget on that. And, we've got to forge through it at some
Okay.
point in
Yeah,
time.
let's do
Now,
it.
again, your call, this is just my perspective on
Sure.
it, but I recognize he is here, and we'd have to have him come back another day to continue with this. Our staff is here every day, so we will accommodate that.
I'm not done.
Yes,
With
okay.
that being said, you have 24 bullet points, and you made a comment that it's better for us to pair them together or have less bullet points?
I said, this is rather large in terms of what we generally see. In order to capture what we heard, what we saw in the survey, we came up with 24. There's a couple that I can see where we talk about equity. There's a couple that could be combined. Candidates are going to look at this, and part of their decision is this a good fit for me, for he or she? And we're going to look at it against the total list. So would it be easier if it were 20 instead of 24? Probably, but again, I don't think it's going to make a large difference unless there's something in how you want to be perceived out there, and part of that's going to take place during the interview process, because when you're interviewing candidates, they're also interviewing you.
Right, I think that we can look at some of these and be able to pair them or marry them together.
Okay.
I do, and I think maybe instead of going from the top down, as we look at what a couple of are similar, and let's put those together. Can we do that?
Can we, there may be some we can just eliminate.
Yeah.
Maybe there are ones
That
we can
too.
go through and we can cut some out right now that board members have ideas of. There may be ones that are simple wordsmithing, and there may be ones that have more substantive issues. And I know there are all of those categories for me. Maybe we can manage that way.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I totally agree, and let's do that. I just have to, before we move forward with this, since we are discussing, there was a newspaper article in TC Palm regarding the presentation of the Tax Force Association, and some question as to whether or not, Dr. Moxley, you would continue on as superintendent, or if you would apply to be superintendent. And I just wanted to clarify that right now. It's my understanding that you, and I don't want to speak for you, so I'm going to ask you to address that.
I am not applying for the position long-term because of my personal situation.
Okay.
And I know I've expressed that to each one of you, but I will formally say that. I will not be an applicant for the long-term position.
Because there are many
I
people who love
wish-
you, who would like for you to stay, and
and
I
I
appreciate
appreciate
that right now.
I do appreciate that, and I have gotten attached. I wish that I were at a different point in my own personal career, and that would be different, but it is not. And my intention was to serve as interim and fulfill that
Thank
obligation.
you for that.
And I had expressed that, I think, last week, or was it, yes, last week on the Bob Seuss.
Right.
I tried to mention that also, that how we value her, but it's just a
You
commitment.
know, it's not a forever home.
And we
Right.
mentioned it at a previous board
Right.
It's
meeting.
not your forever home, right, yeah, okay.
So,
We also mentioned that at a previous board meeting,
Right.
but it does deserve reiteration because
Right.
there is confusion around it.
and that's why I think it's, and we're getting off topic here, but.
Yeah.
It
was important to
She
note.
has a lot of requests because she is such a good speaker and people do admire her that want her to come out and speak at their organization. I think, Dr. Moxley, by just going to the couple and then that's it, because I think it's really confusing to the community right now.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Okay, so we're
jumping around here.
jumping around here, and I'd really like us to kind of stay focused on these bullet points.
Okay,
It doesn't matter how we get through it. If we go top to bottom, it's just
so we know
easier to
number one's good.
navigate. But I do have what Mrs. Barrenborg just mentioned with regard, and Dr. Schiff with regard to maybe eliminating some and consolidating. Midway through the bullets, there are 3 bullets under team builder, not including the one that starts with team builder. But underneath that, it begins with ability to empower staff while also holding them accountable. Under that is the ability to bring stakeholders together on critical educational issues and initiatives. And then under that is the courage to make and stand behind decisions and recommendations based on what is best for the students being served. 2 of those 3 that I just read aloud really have to do with decision-making. If we can consolidate these 3, or at least 2 of the 3, or eliminate one of those 3 altogether, I just think that those can fall under another category where it could just be common sense that we're saying, just being a data-driven decision maker or some other kind of decision maker. But what are your thoughts on these 3 bullets?
Dr. Schiff, and then Mrs.
At least on the
Barrenborg.
third one, courage to make and stand behind decisions and recommend, sorry, I have a note that's, based on what's best for students being served, I think is completely vague and completely a
Yes,
matter of
I
opinion.
agree.
Unless we're going to substantially reword that, I'd get rid of it.
I would get rid of it, too.
I totally disagree.
I do too.
I would
It came
reword
up
it,
in
but I think
several-
it's really vague.
So let's
It came up in
reword it.
several of the
But it's-
items that people were giving us feedback
Well,
on.
but sorry, it's hard to have a conversation this way when this is a conversation better had in a roundtable format, but we can't.
So what are some, those who disagree, what are your
I
suggestions?
have a suggestion. How about courage to make and stand behind decisions that while empowering staff and bringing stakeholders together?
But what does that mean? The courage to make and stand behind decisions, what I think may be that, and what you may think may be that, may be completely different things. And maybe making and standing behind a decision that I think
It's
is
subjective.
completely erroneous, or what may look like making and standing behind a decision may look to somebody else like arrogance and bullheadedness. Like,
I
it's
think
just really vague.
I saw it come up in several of the reports that we read, where somebody isn't afraid to speak to the board. I'll be real honest, speak to us. And
Okay.
stand behind
What they
what's
believe.
right for kids.
Yep.
Great,
Even
that's
though
a-
board members may not be in line with it. I
Yep.
think that came across as something several times that I read. And I'm a board member, so I can say that I read that and it said, the ability to stand for what's right, no matter what the cost. And
Even
I
if it's
think-
political pressure.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
But
and I think we can wordsmith that, and let's not philosophize it so much that it becomes this long, drawn-out conversation. I think we can just,
But that's what we're
But
here
the point
doing.
is,
Let's do it.
what's
Let's,
right is really vague. The ability to stand up for what's right.
But that's
What
why you
Mrs.
hire,
Zork-
but that's why you hire a superintendent to lead the district. We don't hire superintendents so we can micromanage every decision and we agree with every decision we make. We hire them to give us the recommendations. I want someone who's gonna have the courage to stand up and say to this board, listen, board, I hear what you're saying, but you're wrong. If they think we're wrong, they need to tell us, you're wrong. We need to do X, Y, Z, or I need you to give me the space to be vulnerable enough to take some big risks here. That's what innovation is.
I
So
would
that's
call
what.
that working effectively with the board. I would call that knowing how to work effectively with a diverse board.
okay, how about, let's go back to the wording here. How about we combine the last two, and what do you all think about ability to bring stakeholders together on critical educational issues and initiatives and stand behind decision-making?
You know, I don't want somebody to stand behind a decision because they think it's a good idea, but nobody else does.
I'm
You know,
just trying to
I know,
combine them.
I know.
I'm
It's a
just
hard
trying to come
conversation to
up
have.
with a way to combine them too, so we can move on. We can delete the last one.
Well,
and
let's just keep ability to bring stakeholders together on critical educational issues and initiatives. I don't see where that's.
How about ability to work, effectively, this is hard to do in this setting and not with a pen and paper. I know I've made my own notes, but ability to work effectively with
Ability to bring stakeholders together on critical educational issues and initiatives based on what is best for students. How's that? You all okay with that?
Is that for one in, or the?
The
ability
last
to
two.
encourage?
So basically, we delete the last one, but to the middle one, we say, the ability to bring stakeholders together on critical educational issues and initiatives based on what is best for students. So it kind of brings both of them together, and it eliminates the last one.
again, sorry, and we will figure out, I may back off on some stuff. But what's best for students,
Should
we're
always-
talking about it.
I know.
Like we have consensus on what that means. You know, we use certain words and we use certain phrases, like we're all always in agreement about what that means. You may think that, I'm making this up, you may think adding another 5 tests a week is in the best interest and operating on what's best for students. I may think that moving away from that is what's best for students. When we use catchphrases like that, there's a presumption that they have universal meaning.
I'm good.
And they
with-
don't.
I'm
But aren't we
good.
gonna hire a superintendent who we're gonna trust to, I mean, we have to trust that they're gonna
We
make the best
presume
decisions.
that that's what they do.
You're gonna have to give them some space to do it, otherwise why would I mean.
Here's the thing, is that I'm willing to remove that last bullet completely, because in these other bullets that we haven't even discussed, we haven't even gotten to, these other bullets are going to address the courage to make these decisions and stand by them. That's my point, is that we're not there yet, but it's there. There's another bullet here that says relationship builder and creating trust. There's another one here that talks about being accountable, being an outstanding communicator, garnering the support from both internal and external stakeholders. So it's there in other places. I'm okay with just eliminating it now, and let's just move on. Eliminate the
I
last
think
bullet.
also we have to be clear on some things are kind of self-evident. Nobody's applying for this job if they're not operating in what they think is in the best interests of students. Nobody is applying for this job if they don't have the courage to make tough decisions. Nobody is applying for this job if they don't have the energy and the stamina to work hard at it. Like, those things seem fairly self-evident to me. Maybe I'm wrong. But it seems to me that if you're applying for the job and you don't have the energy, like, why would you apply for the job? Why are you applying to be the job of a school superintendent if your first and primary interest isn't operating in the best interest of students in the district? To me, I think that's self-evident in anybody applying for the job. But if people feel it needs to be articulated, then let's articulate it. But some of it is
Redundant.
redundant, or why are you going to apply for the job if
Okay.
that's not who you are and what you do?
So what I'm hearing is consensus for courage, and sorry, I marked it out, to make and stand behind decisions. I hear that there were 2 that wanted to keep it, and then 2 that just want to delete
Yeah.
that sentence.
What do you think? We haven't heard from you.
You know, I do agree that I'm hoping whoever applies has that. To me,
Ability.
it's not, when I look at that, it doesn't really tell me anything as this, like, experienced in negotiations and labor, you know.
Yeah.
and
Right, that
experience
tells me
work.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that tells me something, and
Right.
I think that, the door could be open to so many ways of how somebody can interpret the courage to make and stand behind decisions. So I'm fine with it so that we can move on,
Fine with it for what? To delete it
to
or
take it off.
take it off? Can you take that bullet off?
When I hear there's a consensus.
There is
consensus.
There's
And
consensus to take
someone
that off.
gives me the exact wording, or unless,
Okay,
That's the
It's
delete it.
consensus.
It's delete.
delete. Is there any other that board members wish to just
Yep.
delete?
There's some I would delete, personally.
Go ahead.
Shoot, of course, now. There's one that says proactive leader with experience managing enrollment issues and the ability to embrace and manage change. I have no idea what that means.
Yeah, I don't know what that means. It's
Proactive leader with
nonsense.
experience managing.
I think that's a
enrollment.
lot
Just
of words,
a lot of
not
words.
saying
Ability
anything
to
substantive.
embrace
I think
and
it's,
change.
it's the fact that either we have shrinking enrollment or increasing enrollment, and how do you handle that?
Well, then let's say that.
Experience with enrollment, with
Enrollment managing shifting enrollment, or something like that.
innovation regarding enrollment,
There
or,
you go.
I mean,
Wasn't there another bullet point that kind of had that
It
in
did,
there?
there was.
Let me see.
There's a few more I could get rid of.
keep
Okay.
going.
So-
Can I keep going?
Wait, but
Okay.
if we're here, still here,
Take
why?
that one, hold on.
Ninja.
Proactive leader with experience managing enrollment issues. What are we doing with that?
Experiencing managing shifting enrollment.
That's it, just leave it like that.
Like, the simpler we get,
Yeah.
really.
So
Take
remove-
out
Big fan of cutting
proactive
out
leader
words.
with,
Are you?
Managing enrollment.
Isn't it? Can you
Managing
imagine?
enrollment.
So
and
are
then
you
guys don't
saying-
know, it's not even
Issues
one at
and
a
the
time,
ability.
please. Okay,
So what I hear
give you
is
articles I've written.
proactive leader with experience managing enrollment. That stays, that's what I'm hearing.
no.
But
that's not what-
issues and the ability to embrace and manage change is deleted. Is that what I'm hearing?
No.
No, what
No,
I'm
no,
hearing
I'm
is
hearing that.
experience managing enrollment issues and the ability to embrace and manage change.
No.
No, I thought we were cutting out that whole thing.
The whole thing?
Or we were going to say experiencing managing shifting enrollment, or changing enrollment.
Okay. Experience managing
Enrollment.
enrollment.
Or shifting enrollment, or
I was
changing
gonna say,
enrollment.
just not enrollment, because everybody does that.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
It's changing enrollment,
Issues.
or
it's-
different, trends in enrollment.
it
or
would be the
something.
district structure. I mean, it's the whole district structure.
Yeah, but now you have to tell him what to write, because he's not gonna write it unless you tell him the words. So how do you want it how do you want it worded? Experience
Managing shifting enrollment.
managing shifting enrollment. That's it.
Everybody good with that? Mm-hmm. Well, you're a nay.
Managing shifting enrollment.
Can I offer another to cut?
Go,
Let him write it down first.
but we'll discuss. Go ahead. What's the next one?
So,
Possess
wait,
the
he's
energy
writing,
and
he's
sta-
writing, he's writing.
Oh, yeah, we're discussing while he's writing, but, okay.
Okay, I don't want to confuse him.
I'm taking notes as well.
Okay. Possess the energy and stamina needed to successfully implement the district mission, vision, and strategic plan. I think that's self-evident.
Yeah, we can just get
If
rid
you
of
don't
that
come
one.
in with a lot of energy and stamina, I'm not interested.
Yeah.
And if you haven't demonstrated that in previous jobs from everybody that we reference, check you on, then, like, why would you apply for this job? Then you don't know what this job is. You shouldn't be here.
Yeah, that
I'm
one
sorry, I
needs to
know I'm
go.
being harsh at this point, but
Did you find that one? It's towards the top. Well, it's in the middle, actually. Third of the way down.
However,
Possess the energy.
However, the ability to move the district forward in our vision and our mission and our strategic plan, that's critical.
great, say that then.
It's here. Look
Where-
at,
where
look
did
at
I-
success in bringing stakeholders together to implement the
There
strategic
you go.
vision with action plans and accountability measures for achievement. It's there.
Okay, so let's delete,
So delete the other one that we told you, possess the energy and stamina. That one can go.
the entire thing can go.
Should I just keep rolling?
Well, I'm going
like
to go
it.
back to what Mrs. Barenborg just mentioned. Since it's in the previous bullet, success in bringing stakeholders together to implement the strategic vision and action plans and accountability measures for achievement. is it understood that strategic vision is our strategic plan? Do we want to have added something in there about specifically our strategic plan?
No, let them do their research.
Absolutely.
Let them do some
Okay,
work.
I'm just saying, because our strategic plan is what guides our,
Most-
all of decision-making,
If
so.
they get to an interview and they haven't figured that out, and they don't know what it looks like or can talk about it knowledgeably, they've already.
Well,
Most
that's
most
fine. I'm just
superintendents
fine.
know what a strategic plan is.
Most do, but some have not even gotten there yet.
Well,
So
then
I'm just
they're not our guy
asking if
or
you
woman.
all want to add that in there. Dr. Moxley, you seem like you wanted to say something.
No, I think that if you are
Enough.
here ready to be a superintendent, you know exactly what
Okay,
that
perfect.
means. Yeah.
So number
I'm good.
9, can we, I've numbered them down. Dr. Adams, can we just delete that off there?
Yep.
And then we have, and we deleted number 16, right? Courage to make?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I should have gone down this in order, but kind of
Really
got carried
should've.
away. I know. I
The-
got carried away.
Can I bring up the keen understanding of Florida fiscal issues and history? If we say that, then we're limiting to Florida our choices.
You
I
know,
do know it's important to understand Florida history and fiscal responsibility, and I think that would be preferred. I don't think that we should say that, I don't know. I just feel like I don't want to separate somebody that might be out there that's awesome.
can I respond to that for a second? Because I thought that originally too. And then remembered when we looked for our interim, there was somebody who didn't have direct Florida experience, but who had taught it for a number of years and was very well versed in Florida finance. And I would want somebody who has some understanding of that.
Yes,
I
some.
don't know enough about how it differs state to state.
Can we just change it from, just eliminate the word keen? Are you okay with that? Understanding of Florida fiscal
Sure.
issues? Okay,
Absolutely.
let's just take out the word keen.
Okay.
And I think it opens it up a little bit more, since we're wordsmithing.
Did you, number 12, take out the word keen, and we'll start the sentence with understanding.
And just a note, in working with a recruiter, and Dr. Adams could probably speak more to this, this is the job description, we're coming up with a
Right.
leader profile for them to use, but he also takes in a lot of conversation that we have, right? So his understanding, I think it would be fair to say, and perhaps he'll reiterate at some point, do you have an understanding about what we're looking for as far as a superintendent coming from somewhere else and having an understanding about Florida or being willing to, I mean, I just want you to speak to the recruiting process. We're talking about a lot of different things here. We're talking about this desired characteristics. Is this a job description? Is this something that we're showing to potential candidates, or is this something that you're using as
We're using it for advertising. We're using it for potential candidates, for them to see and for us to vet them against. It's, in a sense, an unofficial job description of the most desirable characteristics that you'd like to see in candidates.
I guess the question I'm asking you is this. We're working with a recruiting firm. We could have just put out a job description with this. We could have done this ourselves and gotten the, why do we use a recruiting firm? I guess that's the,
Well, do we have a sense, after having met with you as a board several times and having met most of you on a one-to-one basis, and the input that we have here, we have a very good sense of the type of skills and talents that the next superintendent's going to need to be successful here.
However, you will go out and do recruiting, but this piece of paper will be in a variety of different.
sure. No, I'm not, and I'm not saying
So it's not just his
important.
word of mouth.
I'm not saying it's not important. All I'm saying is that, it goes beyond just what's written on this paper. These are words. It's important, but there's also another element to it.
Of course there is. And this is how we represent ourselves as a district in a variety of different environments, both face-to-face and written and in whatever media it's being used. So I would like this to
If that
as
is,
best as possible, reflect us.
and if that is the case, it would be my personal opinion that we should limit it to probably 12.
Yes.
I mean, we should really be very tough, and
I'm
if we're
great
going to
with
do
that.
it, to limit it to 12, because this,
could
to
get rid
me,
of a
is
lot of
just
this.
too,
I
it's
think
just
there's
too
way
much.
too much on it, and there's way too much
Yeah.
on it that's not succinctly stated, worded, or
I agree.
intended.
It's messy, and I mean,
Um,
not, it's fine, but it's just too much.
Can we take a 10-minute break?
Please.
Please.
But before we do, did you have a question or can it wait?
I can wait.
Okay, let's go ahead and, well, let's come back at 3:10, okay?
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. We're at 3:10. We are now into the desired characteristics of our presentation. I was talking with Dr. Moxley and Dr. Adams on break to see how we can get this completed within 50 minutes because we really need to get this complete. It was brought to my attention that, and just a reminder, that we have a job description for a superintendent. These are just characteristics of what they have gathered from the town hall, or the forums, the surveys. These are characteristics that they saw in that, and they're putting it over into this. So, you know, when I was looking through some of the wording, I was talking with Dr. Moxley, and, you know, she has an understanding of these, of what some of these are, where we might not have the understanding of what it's asking for. So I would like to get Dr. Moxley's input on this, because I feel like I don't want to not respect the voice of everyone that come out to these forums and also the survey. So I just want to make sure that we're conscientious of that, okay?
Thank you, Mrs. Zork. I was asked the direct question. Okay, you've been a superintendent candidate before. You've walked this walk. So when you look at this document, what is, you know, what do you see? What is the purpose? What is this communicating? And so when I think about that question, and I think when I look at this, who is our audience? This document is intended to be potential superintendent candidates, just like what I would have been. And so when I think about this, you can't have too much information for a potential candidate, because this document is being used to convey to potential candidates the input that came from the community, the input from the essence of this school district, the essence of this community. And so the more information, the more insight that I can have about this community helps me prepare for what I'm about to partake in through the interview process. It's also giving me an understanding, is this the right district for me as a potential candidate? Because I don't want to apply for a district that maybe my strongest skill set is not a good match for the needs of this district. And so the fact that there's 24 on here is not a negative thing. And I would agree, Mrs. Justice, with you that sometimes more concise and you know, less kind of allows you to wrap your arms around it. I think in this situation, more is more information. The more information I can get, the more it helps me to look at this and say, okay, what does this mean? I'm going to go back to number 16, where we talked about courage to make and stand behind decisions. Yes, I agree, that's vague for the average person out there. What does that mean? But to a superintendent candidate, I know very clearly what that means. What that tells me when I read that there is saying you want someone who is able to make the tough decisions, whatever that tough decision may be. Whether it's to make a boundary change decision that's unpopular, whether it's to make a personnel decision that's unpopular, whether it's the ability to stand up to the scrutiny of the decision that it is in the best interest of students, that students are first, and having that excellence in an educational program. So when I read that one, that's very clear to me what that means. That if I'm not a good decision maker, I'm not willing to stand up to the scrutiny, and that's important here in this district, then I need to think twice about that. as an applicant. But that's why I'm saying, know who our audience is. If this is going to go out and be reflective to the community, then yes, I agree. The community, there's going to be a difference of opinion on what that means. But to a superintendent candidate, I'm very clear. I know what that means because
that
that's
really was the
language we
question.
use.
But can I ask you something about that?
And then
Um,
Mrs. Rosario.
Yeah. I certainly don't disagree with you at all. I do think we can say it better, but I do think that on some of these things, aren't some of them self-evident? I mean, and you have more experience with that than I do, but aren't some of them just self-evident that it's not like, gee, do I have this or not? But if I am applying for a job at this level, certain things are just really clear I should know how to do. I may be overestimating, and I may have less familiarity with that than you. But if that communicates to you courage to make and stand behind decisions, and you tell me that communicates something, I do accept that. I would be surprised if somebody applied for a job at this level and didn't have that experience or capacity to be a strong decision maker. Am I overestimating?
No, I agree with you. I agree 100% to you that, a superintendent should be able to do that. There's no question about that. That's a basic 101 skill. But I also think that this has come up through the community input as something that they see is definitely a high priority here. And so it's not saying that it's not self-evident or that someone should not have that basic skill. It's really saying that that's a high priority here, and that's a point of it's stressed. It's something that came up and surfaced through all this data as being that they want to make sure that that's very clear that you're a strong decision maker. And I think there's decision making, and then and I'm sorry, in any situation, and there's times when I reflect back that, okay, that's a decision, boy, I didn't want to have to make it. And I knew that I was going to be on the headline of every newspaper, and I was going to be on the 6 o'clock news. But it was a decision that was right for students, and it had to be made. And that's frankly why you hired me to do it. And so I had to do that. But some people don't always do that because it's hard. And that's where that word courage, I think, communicates that that's a strong requirement here in this district.
I guess my question is more, if you're applying for the job, and not just in this one, but in others of them, don't you, wouldn't you think that you are that? I might not think you are that, but if you're applying for the job, you presume about yourself that you have these characteristics. And whether or not I agree is what I do as the hiring authority. But the presumption that you have a high level of integrity, I don't know anybody who would say they don't think that about themselves. So how do we manipulate that in a way that that gets at those things in the way that you're suggesting and communicates, but doesn't also, instructional leader who is passionate about teaching and learning, if you're applying for this job, I presume you are passionate about teaching and learning. How do we get at those things in a way that communicates, but doesn't state the obvious, or, I'm not saying this well,
Okay,
but-
so I guess what I'm going to say at this point in time is that we can spend a lot of time going through and wordsmithing this, and certainly prerogative to do that. So I don't want to diminish that. At the end of the day is the fact of if that were to stay there or not be there. But some of these things, like I said, we can debate them, today, tonight, tomorrow. But at the end of the day is the fact whether it's on there or not, is it going to be problematic for a candidate to have too much information?
No.
I mean, that's really when I look at it is there a problem with any of these on here that if they were communicating, are they communicating the wrong message? Are they, I think the fact that came from public input And that's where I have a little bit of a concern, that this seems to be reflective of the things, the data that came and all of that. Could it be stated a little better? Maybe to some, maybe not to others, but is it problematic that it's on there? So I guess my question would be kind of one in reverse. Are there any on here that actually cause great angst and concern that it misrepresents the needs and the desires and the input that we've received? Then those need to come off.
Okay, so that is what we need to get to, but we have Mrs. Rosario, then Mrs. Justice, and then we need to get to this.
Okay. Where we left off before, and taking into consideration what Dr. Moxley is mentioning, there is a way to eliminate number 13.
Before we jump into that, Mrs. Rosario, and eliminating and changing, did you have a comment
I did.
about,
Yeah, I did.
about eliminating or
Yeah, uh-huh.
keeping? Okay, then we'll go.
No, about it's just a general comment to
Okay.
what
Okay, go ahead.
Dr. Moxley said. My concern is always going to be what Dr. Adams, I mean, if this is a recruiting tool, I want to know what he wants, what he feels needs to happen with this. Personally, I find it to be an overwhelming amount of information just because it's very wordy. Is it possible to change the format perhaps where it's more of an outline type of experience and then ... rather than so many words? That would be my question, just to clean it up, because for advertising purposes, I don't know how much space you have, but it just seems like a lot of words. That's my question to you.
Can I
Can I
follow up
please,
on that?
can I go back to my comment? Because there's ways of addressing the wordiness if we can get back to what we were doing before. I think we were on track.
I don't think we were.
I feel like we were off track because we're
I actually think that we've been deleting some and merging with others, so,
And I really think we need to leave that to them
okay.
to do this, because this is the words and the, I mean, it might not be how we would have presented it, but like what Dr. Moxley was saying, she understands these, and, you know, where we might not have used that wording, but it's the wording that a superintendent, potential superintendent understands, and then we have our experts over here that put all that information together and put it on here. So I'm just, I don't
I'd
really.
like to go back to my thoughts, please.
I really feel like you said, is there anything we can't live with?
Right.
I'd be comfortable right now to say, is there anything we can't live with? If we can't live with it, let's strike it, and then let's give it back to HYA and say, we're good with everything that's on this list, format it how you want to, merge it together, but we're good, you know, there's nothing on this list that we don't agree with. I would be comfortable doing that at this point and then moving forward.
Okay,
Okay, so
But-
I would like to suggest in eliminating number 13, eliminating number 21. The key words in 13 and 21
don't know
is
which
team
13
builder, if you count down. Team builder, where it starts with team builder,
Okay.
and then down below is optimistic leader. There's one team builder and there is one optimistic leader. I'd like to bring those two, because those are important. I'd like to bring those two up to bullet number 3.
Are we
Okay?
reprioritizing now?
So it would say, an instructional leader and a team builder who is an optimistic and courageous decision maker.
Was this Dr. Adams, was this prioritized 1 through 20, the 1 being more important than anything else on the list?
No, it was
Oh,
not.
okay.
So
I just wanna
that
make
way,
sure.
we've eliminated the wordiness of at least 2, we eliminate 13 and 21, and you put them all together in the third bullet. Is everybody okay
Okay,
with that?
so if you have in the third bullet, an instructional leader and team builder,
builder who is an optimistic and courageous decision maker.
an optimistic and courageous decision maker, okay?
Are we going to continue down this path, Mrs. Rourke? Is this what you want to do?
There you've eliminated, so far, we've eliminated 1, 2, 3, 4
I want
altogether.
consensus of how the board wants to move forward on this.
Can I make a suggestion?
In, you next.
Or I
Go.
can wait.
Can I, Mrs. Barrenborn?
Thank you. Dr. Moxley brought up that more information's better. They gathered information from lots of different community members. They put it into maybe not the words exactly that some of us want, but they put it into a document you feel as though a superintendent needs that information, however it's worded. The first one we eliminated was one you brought up and said, I thought it was a good one to have, so could we have that one back?
Well, whether it's in there or not isn't going to change one
Okay.
thing or another.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean,
You look at these things, and that's not the reason why you apply for the
Yeah,
job. You look
yeah.
at it and you go, okay, yep,
Right,
yep,
right.
I can apply for
Right.
this.
I just use that one
But we're
as an
spending
example.
a lot of
Yeah.
time
Too.
looking at this document when I don't think that the applicants are going to spend as much time looking at this document
It's
the way we
information.
are.
It's
Yeah.
just, it's information that they will take in and internalize to get a intrinsic understanding and feel of Indian River School District.
But to that point, though, what Dr. Schiff was saying about it is a certain snapshot of who we are and how we think. In my opinion, it could be streamlined, and I think I would just like to see it streamlined by HYA, not by us. Is there anything we can't live with? To me, I don't think it's a reflection of the succinctness we'd like to show as a district. Does that make sense? Or, I think the professionalism is important.
Can I make a suggestion? How about we have Dr. Moxley work with Dr. Adams and then streamline it and combine some of the points together? But because Dr. Moxley understands the wording, that the final result of what the wording needs to be is, would you be okay with that, working with him?
I'm certainly happy to work with Dr. Adams. My question would be, I really want to know in the next 5 minutes if there's one you can't live with. And if we could just go right down the line.
No,
which one-
I'm
yeah.
fine with that.
Can I make a brief comment? I'm fine with that, was going to suggest exactly the same thing myself. I happen to like here where you broke it into the
Methodology.
characteristics of vision and values, teaching and learning, community engagement, management. Would it be possible to organize these things in those categories? So there's some clarity in each of the areas, which was how you asked about it, and then you can work on the specificity and the wordsmithing together. Would that work?
That sounds awesome.
Yep, I like that.
Me too.
So are we still on the, what we suggested prior to this moment right now? Are we still
So would you like me to
considering
summarize?
those?
She has the input.
So we're going to use those as well?
So her question is there anything that you cannot live with?
I heard the question.
Okay,
I didn't answer because there's nothing
Okay.
that I cannot live with.
okay,
The one thing that I need to make mention that is key to Indian River is our technical education. And there's nothing here that regards adult ed or CTE.
is that in her job description?
Probably not. I mean, if it's
But if it's
specifically
a
something that we're looking for.
characteristic,
Okay,
knowledge or
I think it's worth putting
understanding
in. I
or,
think it's worth putting in there.
okay.
absolutely.
I really like your idea of the methodology of breaking it down in that
Yes.
way. I think that's
Thank
a
you.
good idea.
May I make a suggestion? The one about equity,
Yes.
could we broaden that to be equity, inclusion, and diversity? I'd like to make sure we get broader forms of inclusion in there.
They're in there separately, I think.
Where?
There is one at the bottom that says, experience working in a diverse and complex community.
And
And
then
you
go
have
up.
one up above that says, experience addressing equity issues in a complex environment.
So combine those. I'm sure
I
you
think
guys are gonna
those
do
two
that.
can be combined
Can be
with adding your inclusion, and you had another word in there.
Diversity.
Okay.
A term that's being used a lot now is DEI or DEIA, diversion, equity, inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So I want to,
Add a snappy
attentive to
acronym.
that and supportive of the people in the district for whom those words and that intention is meaningful. and important.
So are there other words beside inclusion and diversity? Accessibility.
Can I ask you a question? When you, as a superintendent, read data-driven decision maker who uses common sense, does that communicate to you? Okay, can you clarify what that communicates to you?
Well, I think that you look at your data and you gather as much data as you can, but at the end of the day, you make, you have to use I don't know how to, common sense is.
You have to be okay living in the
You have
land
to
of
be,
no.
well, no, I mean, you have to, there's a sense of practicality here. And that's what common sense is that, I don't know how to qualify that any differently. I internalize it and completely understand it, but obviously I'm not able to explain it, but.
Well, when you say
yeah.
practicality, that says something different to me. You know, balancing data, data and practical needs or solutions, that.
I'm trying to
communicates
think
for
of an
me.
example,
I
examples
understand.
and non-examples help communicate your message and clarity.
I guess for me, what's important, and this is not, is that the words we use be as precise as possible and as less subject to subjective interpretation. One person's common sense is another person's lunacy, right? So the ways in which we are as specific as possible in the wording, and I completely trust the two of you together to do that.
I think the problem that I sense we're getting into is that at the end of the day, this is a tool to help just paint a picture, and I agree that it's our picture that we're trying to paint. But somebody's going to internalize this, and again, if we use common sense or we use practicality or whatever, it's still open to the interpretation of the person reading the document. And I don't know how to get to a 100% guarantee that the receiver that we are not interacting with, that is reading this online and from Ed Week, or is going to understand it, interpret it exactly the way we intended it sitting here.
So there were two things that I don't see here. One is transparency. So maybe in one of the bullets, it says relationship builder who can create a trusting environment, maybe not say trusting environment, maybe say who can create a trusting, transparent, collaborative environment, or something to that effect. But transparency is not here, and I know that that's a big concern for many who are in the district and those who are in our community. And I did not see anything here with regard to working with board members. I may have missed it, but I didn't see anything here. So I
Ability
think
to
that
navigate
those
the political
two,
arena.
Ability to establish trustful and respectful relationships with board members, staff, and community members. It's
Where
the
is
second to
that?
last bullet.
oh, there it is. I missed it.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. And then my last thing is to just pay attention to some of the font sizes. Some of the fonts are different.
I think we're getting, okay,
I think that'll all get.
okay.
I presume that and there's a typo or two will just get.
Well, and then
and cleaned
to, there was, is this the place that we put an innovator?
I'd like that word in there somewhere.
Okay.
That's the only
Because
word I would
that.
like.
An innovative instructional leader is what I love.
So I'm looking at my list and I see everything that I had originally had. It came out into this. The only thing that wasn't in there was superintendent experience, but
Great.
we've already talked about that. So, so I'm okay with everything in there.
Awesome.
Well done, great suggestions. Thank you for streamlining that process.
Thank you. So, what else?
I have one item on our agenda that is a timeline that you're voting on tonight that I would like 5 minutes
Okay.
to have.
Can I hand this out real quick first? It's the superintendent search timeline, just to remind us. I know we went over this. I just want us all to keep in mind of that.
Can I come back to this for a second? Under requirements, we only have two things, and one we say is desirable, not a requirement. Can we clarify that? If these really are our only requirements, and if an EdD or a PhD is desirable, then it's not a requirement. If it's a requirement, then it's a requirement.
The intent was to take the feedback and still be as flexible as possible so that we didn't eliminate any candidates.
I agree, but
At some point, if the recruiter's comfortable with it, again, it's a recruiting,
Don't we have to go by
he's
that
comfortable with it,
requirement?
I would let it lie.
so,
Yes, that's a good point.
so those are our, do we agree that those are our only two requirements?
No.
Wouldn't we follow our job description on this?
Sure.
And I think,
Excuse me. The job description obviously would take precedence. This is a tool, it's a guide for us.
Might we then want to put a link to a job description?
Can you do that? Not with Ed Week, obviously not,
no,
but.
no, you wouldn't, because Ed Week would be an advertisement. But,
I mean, doesn't this beg the question, and I'm going to shoot myself for saying it, but I'm going to say it anyway, does this not beg the question that we should be revising the job, we should be reviewing and revising the job description with the help of someone from FADS or something like that, to make sure that the job description is what we're comfortable and need at this time? Because the job description previously did not get us the superintendent that apparently we needed.
so what I'm going to say here to this with requirements, you're saying a PhD or an EDD is desirable. That doesn't eliminate. What I see as a requirement is they must have a master's degree in certification in ed leadership is a
Definitely.
requirement.
that's
And I
not here.
believe that is in your job description. And so I think that needs to be said. So my suggestion would be is that whatever your requirements are in your job description, which I believe it's a master's degree in ed leadership, or higher, and that your PhD or your EDD is desirable or preferred, that's what's put here.
So you could say that it's master's is required, comma, PhD, EDD is desirable.
Right.
Yes.
And sorry if this is overly specific. An EdD is a specific education degree, a PhD is not. Do we need to clarify a PhD in education or related field?
What you may want to say is you want certification, you want a master's degree or higher in educational leadership. That's your certification. Your PhD, you can be a little bit more flexible for, but an EDD is, but if you want a PhD in education, I think you're limiting then.
No, I agree. And, I think I have a PhD in public administration. I think it's a relevant degree.
Absolutely.
But I don't want a PhD in art history. Somebody presumably knows that, but this is,
his job, though.
Yep.
They'll weed those out.
Yeah, and however, if I have a master's degree in certification in ed leadership, and I've been a practicing superintendent,
Right.
and by the way, I just happen to have a doctorate in art education.
Right.
You might not
Fair
eliminate
enough.
that
Right,
person.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, and if you'll have a few minutes for me, we're going to have a 10-minute issue before we're done with our workshop here.
All right.
Yeah.
Can we then, we'll connect
Yes,
after?
correct.
Well, thank you.
Thank you,
And we will
Dr.
get
Adams.
this together and
Thank you, Dr.
Is everybody
Adams. comfortable
comfortable with where we are at this point in time?
I
That's
am.
Super good.
critically important.
And we're still on the
comfortable as we're
timeline.
gonna be.
We're still on the timeline. I passed it out. We're still on mark.
Good job.
Yeah, we're
We're
good.
good.
We're good. Okay, I'm going to invite Pam Dampier to come forward and skip to, if we look at our agenda, human resources update, that will come back at our next workshop. The review of the capital plan, that can come back. We're not close to our timeline on that, so we're good. The AFR is on the agenda tonight, so that's on action, so we can take care of the questions on that. No?
No, it's fine.
And so the African American Achievement Plan I pulled. for today because the Equity Committee met last night. I think they finished up their work, but I don't have the value of the rest of their input, and I think it's very important to honor their input and get that. I recognize that we were a little bit off the timeline for the African American Achievement Plan. However, I believe it's important to get that right, and so we will get that feedback ASAP. And so the item that is time-sensitive is the K-12 instructional materials adoption process. Mrs. Dampierre, she's going to come forward. You do have this item in your, in the board docs for the workshop today. There is a timeline, and what you are voting on tonight is the hearing officers, if I believe that's correct,
Explain the hearing officers.
for the materials. Yes. So Mrs. Dampierre is going to run us through this real quick, and we want to make sure that we're answering any questions that you might have, and I will pull this up.
Do we have the clicker?
We don't. They have it actually electronic. Oh, no, you don't. All of you do not.
Yeah, we have it.
Yeah.
They have it? Okay, they have the PowerPoint, okay?
Do you want to share this?
Sure.
Okay,
Thank you.
there we go.
I got it, I could pull it.
It's up on the screen, so you can just refer to it on the screen. Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon, board members, Dr. Motsley, and community members. Today, we're going to provide you an overview of the K through 12 instructional materials adoption process. We're going to go over the timeline and just go over the process so you're familiar with it. The Instructional Materials Adoption Committee reviews, evaluates, and recommends the instructional adoption of materials to the board. And from that committee, we have committee members that can consist of teachers, administrators, parents, and community members. We just had our first meeting last night, and we had about 15 members for that. This year, the community members will review the world language, computer science, and the career and technical education instructional materials. The school board annually selects the hearing officers from a list of candidates provided by the superintendent. And that will be on our consent agenda tonight. And we're hoping that you will vote on that. If there are petitions filed, the hearing officers will conduct a public hearing and submit a recommendation to the school board for a final decision. So we have two that are being recommended tonight to serve in case we have some petitions come forward or that actually have concerns about our textbook adoption. Our committee meetings, we have 3 that are outlined on our timeline. Committee meeting 1 occurred last night. That was our first meeting where we reviewed the timeline. We established protocols and procedures and selected a committee chair, and we always want to make sure we have a teacher's voice with that. Committee meeting number 2 is scheduled for October 21st. That's when the publishers will have make a presentation to the committee. And then committee meeting number 3 is December 10th, and that's where we would collect the rubric information and analyze that data from each school, because they'll have a chance to look at the material. And the committee makes recommendation to the superintendent for materials to be adopted. And that's usually when we bring that information to the board. Our textbook extravaganza, and we usually have that well, we're going to have it on October 28th, but it's usually held here, and we have all various publishers that are here, and they have displays, and this is an opportunity for teachers and community members to come and ask questions and to talk to publishers about the different instructional materials. Then we have the instructional materials review at the school site from October 31st to December 5th, and we really wanted to give the teachers time to actually look at it, make comments, so when we do come back and reconvene with the rubric, that we have some good feedback. And then on that day, committee members facilitate a review of the instructional materials at each school site using an evaluation rubric, and that has been attached to our to the website. Then we have the 20-day calendar day public review, and that's from December 12th to this January 16th. And then we publish the read-only editions on the website for parents to review, as well as students' displays will be here at the district office as well as at the school site. So we usually have it out in the foyer out here. And then we have our presentation to the school board with recommended materials on February 11th. And then there will be a board workshop where we'll bring the recommendation for the committee that we will be bringing forward to the board. Then we will have our school board hearing, public hearing on February 25th, 2020. And then we have a period for a 30-day calendar day contest period from February 26th to March 26th. And during that time, we also have an opportunity for parents of an enrolled student or resident can file a petition. And this is where they can, we have it posted on our website that they can post a petition for that. And then we have the week of April 13th for the hearing officer hearing. And that's where we conduct a public hearing on all petitions if there was one, and we provide recommendations to the school board. And then on May 12th, if we don't have any petitions, on May 12th, 2020, the school board votes to approve the purchase of the instructional materials. And it's the same process we follow every year, but this year is for 3 different subjects. Usually it's 1. Last year we had math, and this year we're looking at world language, computer science, and CTE.
Mrs. Berenborg, and then Mrs. Justice, then Dr. Schiff.
Yeah, I had the privilege of serving as, on this when we adopted science years ago in Indian River, and it was quite an experience to go to Tallahassee and be on that. I got to go on that and be on that board, and that was quite interesting. The question I have is, how are committee members selected for this? And if you can give us kind of an understanding, because there are some community members, maybe not on this particular selection, but on others that are quite interested in how that goes about.
You want to talk about how you think?
Good afternoon. We took recommendations from administrators for folks to serve on this committee, and then we invited them to serve, and they either accepted or declined. This is these areas are pretty specific to content, so there are specific people we really wanted to have the voice in the room. But it's recommendations, invitations, it's really open. Anybody who wants to serve can submit their name to serve.
But how do they know to do that? That's my question. Is, let's say that I'm out there, I'm a welder, I'm very interested in this, and I feel like I can maybe give some input to this. How would I go about being a committee member?
So, for example, with CTE, the courses called were extremely specific this year, unlike in years past where career and technical education was included on the whole with the adoption. This time they were very pointed with only a few courses being called, and even within the scope of those courses, only 3 of them are taught here in Indian River County. So to that point, culinary and I'll use automotive, those 2. We only have 2 teachers, 1 at each high school. So in a situation like that, I have the ability to reach out directly to my teachers, and I'm on their campuses as much as possible, meeting with them. So, I've been sharing with them moving, to this point, what the process would be, and they're both serving on this committee.
So I have a follow-up to that. In the future, when we're looking at adoptions, and this one may not be as controversial as others, could we possibly, as we're moving towards more transparency, put it out there on our website and say that we're going to be forming a committee on an adoption for U.S. history, let's say. If you have a desire to be a committee member, here's an application. Is that a possibility?
So we're doing applications.
I'm just asking, is that a possibility?
I mean, we've put it on our website, it's been posted but we could do an
But
application.
in the past, for all of our instructional materials, we've always, Mrs. Zork has spoken about it on Bob Seuss. It's been on our website. We've listed it. We've spoken about it at board meetings. Last was math. I mean, we do post it on the website.
I understand that, but what I specifically asked, how did we do it here? And the answer I got was we had principals that nominated people.
It's on the website.
But we also have it on the website.
That's what I'm saying. We need to put it out there that we're doing that.
Yeah, we have
I
it on
just
the
feel
website.
like When I was running for office, I heard that several times.
Right, so I guess my question is going to be, at some point, and we've discussed this before, we seem to have a couple people who will say, well, I didn't know. At what point is there an onus to be interested enough to find out, right? So if we need to look at other methods of getting information out, because we hear about this a lot, do we need to be advertising in papers? Do we need to be doing something on social media differently? You know, I think that going forward, we need to diversify perhaps what we're doing, but there's also has to be some understanding that the people who are interested enough to know are going, you're always going to have people that are going to say that they weren't aware, or I mean, I feel like as a school board member, there's a balance in that, because I do know, having served for the past 3 years, when we've done instructional materials adoption, we've been very vocal about asking for community members. We've reached out to community members as board members and asked people to serve, right? We were asked to do that the last time we did instructional materials adoption. I know Mrs. Zork did that with a number of people, some who decided to continue to serve, some who decided not to continue to serve. They didn't like our process, perhaps. But I mean, there has been a certain amount of outreach, which I would imagine needs to just continue.
We could put it on the front page of the
That's what I'm asking,
website
is
and
to
just
put it on
say
the
if
front
you're
page?
interested,
Okay.
you know, contact our office. But it
Okay.
has been posted on the website for a couple of weeks now.
Okay, I'm just asking, maybe front
Up
page of the
under, yeah,
website would
we
help.
can do that.
Just because I did hear that feedback, and I do need to bring that forward, that I've heard that feedback before. And I agree with you, you can only advertise so much, and you can't bring, you know, the horse to water.
Right.
So, but if it's on the, you know, sometimes people say, well, I didn't see it on the website. I didn't know where to look. If it's on the front page, you see it on the website.
Okay.
Dr. Schiff. Go ahead, Dr. Schiff. You have 10 minutes. You don't have 10 minutes, but we have 10 minutes.
I'm not taking 10 minutes. I also had the same question as Mrs. Berenborg about who's on the committee and how do they get there. These three, world language, computer science, and computer and technical education, are three really diverse and different subjects, but what I see here is a committee. Can you clarify for me if these are separate committees or how that works to address each of these three areas?
Yes,
They
it's
worked on it
one
last night.
global committee to start with, and then we've broken them up into subcommittees based on the specific criteria. So the folks who are in the room with an expertise in the world languages will serve on that committee. The folks who are in the room around computer science with expertise in that area will serve on that subcommittee. And the same with the CTE courses. They're very specific. So we do
So-
have them broken up into subcommittees.
So it's a instructional materials adoption committee broken up into subcommittees in each specific area.
Usually,
And that's not unusual. We've done that when we did the math adoption as well. We broke up elementary, middle, and high school. You know, so you want people in their expertise, their area of expertise.
and usually there is one subject. This happens to be a, you know, a combination of
Right,
three.
which-
Yeah, from the
Which
from the
makes it
state.
more complex
Yes.
than previously and makes the ways in which we do it
Mm-hmm.
increasingly complex. And to Mrs. Berenborg's point about being as inclusive as we can, one of the things that, this is for Mrs. Maddox, we've gotten much better about over the last year or so, is we put stuff out on social media. We push out notification, Lord knows, I see every phone and email I have seems to get notices. But we put it out on email, we put it out on Focus, we put it out through text messaging. So we could step up our game that way as well, because not everybody goes directly to the website unless they have a specific issue, a specific reason why they're going to the website. So I'd encourage us to do that, and if it's not too late for this
can.
process, to push it out so that if people want to join, they can.
We still, last night was our first meeting, and it was
Right.
just an initial process, so we still can push it out. They can attend the
Yeah,
second.
I have a question. So just, this is kind of a broader question, but I'm going to ask it. Having students in the district, I recognize that we adopt curriculum. We're adopting this textbook. It's taught in different ways and unfolds different ways in the classroom. When there's supplemental curriculum that's offered, perhaps a newspaper article or something like that, how is that type of information vetted? I had a newspaper article that was sent to me recently by a parent that was from the Beijing Review. It was an article about globalism that was very very pointed in one direction versus another. And the parent had a concern about that being used for instruction. So how do we go about, and I guess the question is for you, Dr. Moxley, how are those supplemental curriculum pieces selected, and what type of vetting? And then if a parent has a concern about something like that, what do they do?
I'm going to ask Mrs. Dampier to answer that from past experience here in the district, so that I'm not speaking from a past experience that is not here.
Well, we do have a list of supplemental material that have been approved. They've been vetted through us. And if, of course, a school wants to add supplemental material, they would bring it to the curriculum review process, which consists of committee members, and we look at that process. But as far as individual school, a teacher going to find something off a teacher paid teacher or a resource, that would be at the school level, where the principal and the assistant principal should be vetting and looking at that and being a part of that collaborative process.
So is there a requirement by a teacher who would like to bring supplemental curriculum into the classroom to have it reviewed by the principal, assistant principal, or perhaps grade chair before it's given to students?
Each school has, some schools are much more stringent, where it has to come through, the principal if they want to make a copy of something, but it just depends on each particular school.
So then my question would be to Dr. Moxley, in your past experience as a superintendent, and is there any type of district level control or constraints that are put on what type of supplemental material can be used at all schools, and what the vetting process is for those materials?
I'm very familiar with the process that Mrs. Dampier just described, that the supplemental materials, and we have them in almost every content area, that there is an oversight with that. But there is the question, I think, that really comes up, is that if I am a teacher and I go out and I see this article over here and it's very pertinent to the topic, am I allowed to bring that in? Well, there's a certain level of inspection that must go on, and many times you want to make sure that teachers are being resourceful and bringing those things in, but there is a level of understanding and direction that should be given at each school level by the principal of the school of what the expectation is, that has to be, you review it before you show it. If it's a video, you review it or read it before you use it, and there is the understanding that it must be age appropriate, the language must be appropriate, and if there is a, if it's in the social studies area, for example, where it's a topic that is controversial, you have to make sure that it's presented in the unbiased requirements as directed by board policy, because I believe if we go into board policy, you're going to see all of that's outlined.
So then my question would be to you, at this point in the conversation, if there's material that's being disseminated in a classroom that is pro our President Donald Trump or anti our President Donald Trump, how are we balancing that? Because I know that type of information is going out. I've seen it. So as a parent, if I had a concern, how would I go about addressing
As a parent, if you have a concern, we need to hear from you. And that would go first to the principal of the school, because that may only be happening in one classroom in that particular school. If it's happening, if it's an article that's being used across the board and all 7th grade civics or whatever it might be, then that certainly would be kicked up to the district level, because then I would want to attest.
So as a parent, I go to the principal and I say, my child reviewed
Brought
this
home this,
information, I have
yes.
a concern about it,
Yes.
could we discuss it?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Mrs. Berenberg?
Yeah, what you said hit it perfectly, is that we do have a vetting process for most supplemental materials, but you, as a principal, you can't control everything everybody does. We talked about common sense before. Common sense isn't so common.
Right.
Think about that. And so you can't control everybody's actions, and you do have passionate teachers that are passionate about subjects, and they're passionate about what they do. If we had lesson plans that are vetted by principals ahead of time, and they have that time to be able to go through everybody's lesson plan and say, okay, yeah, everything's great, then that happens. But you know what? Those things are going to happen. And I think a parent has a concern about something, they bring it directly to that principal and they say, I have a concern. And sometimes parents don't do that because they're afraid of retaliation for their own child. And they can bring it to us. And we bring it to the superintendent. Superintendent deals with it with the principal.
It's very important to know if that occurs.
Yes.
Questions?
I do have a question. If my question is, I'm looking here, because I know that what's gonna happen during these, book fairs or whenever these, vendors come in, these books are gonna look fantastic, they're gonna do a really good job in presenting them, but what happens if, let's say for world language, we like the books that we have, and they're, you know, if you weigh out the value of maybe 2 changes here, it doesn't really equate to us needing to switch over. Is there ever a time that we say, "No, we're happy with what we have, we're just gonna keep it," because this is a review, but it's not a mandate that we have to switch, right?
Yes, we're doing that now with CTE, as a matter of fact, we're only looking at 3 different subject areas that we're looking at for the adoption. The next time, I think we were talking this morning, it's gonna be like 10 years, the materials may be 10 years old. So yes, of course, if there is not a need, just like we did last year, of course, we will not move forward with that particular subject. But this is feedback from the teachers. We can't, we're facilitating the process, but we
Right.
can probe and, do that kind of thing, but they make the decisions.
Where does that funding for the books come from? Is that part of the state funding that
Yes,
we
the
get?
FEFP.
But does it cover the entire cost?
Usually for full adoption, like our core materials, no. But if you recall, last year, we did have some rollover money because it was a gap year. We purchased all that materials for GAP, for ELA, and for math. So I think we have about $500,000 that's left. Of course, we should have some money left for this year because we're not doing a full adoption for CTE. So when we do have the full adoption, which would be ELA and math, that's where we usually spend a whole lot of money, if you recall, because we went to class sets. It's still over the adoption. We're gonna get approximately 1.4 million. We've been allocated, and of course, the charter schools get 13 to 14% of that off the top. So from that, we're trying to be cost efficient with letting teachers know if we don't need to purchase new materials, we don't have to. It's not a requirement, but we
And
want to make
then-
sure that
And then
it's
that
covering the
money will
sandwich.
roll over into the next book
Yes.
adoption?
It is a
So right
category.
now, we have last year's
Okay.
money. I've already met with Mr. Fagan, and we have 500 and some
Okay.
thousand from last year that rolled over from.
When there's a standards change, a significant
Right.
standards change,
Yes.
then it's required that
Yes.
we change the
Yes.
curriculum.
Yes.
Which
So
is
right-
coming.
Yes.
We need to be
February,
aware.
January.
Yes, we need to be cognizant of that.
So we do feel like we'll have some money that will roll from this adoption.
Awesome. All right, any other questions, comments?
No, we're
Thank you.
good.
Good
Thank
feedback.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Wanna-
team.
Do you want to review when we're going to cover the rest of that? And then
Yes. So the items that are on our agenda that we did not do were the Human Resources update and the review of the 5-year capital plan, and then the African American Achievement Plan will come back at a later time. We can, our next time, the next board meeting, that is a discussion agenda. So then these would come back on the superintendent's agenda unless you want them to come on the next.
They can come on discussion as far as I'm concerned. They're
Me
important to
too.
cover.
so, too.
Okay? Then I will move those for 2 weeks from today.
Okay. All right.
Does that include the African American Achievement?
I will give you an update. We're going to go through all the feedback, yeah. I'm
Okay.
not sure we'll have that done in 2 weeks.
Okay, we'll be back here at 6 PM. and we're going to adjourn this meeting, 4:02.
Thank you, board members.